So James is with us today. James Bartley. He's an experiencer, abductee. He's got my labs. James, I appreciate so much, and I'm just going to fangirl a little bit, like I usually do. People like James and Tom were people who literally saved my sanity at about this time last year when I was completely lost in the dark, and some very, very terrible things were happening to me. And it was people like James and Tom I could reach out to and talk to, and they were saying to me, "Oh, yeah, this happens." And so they were both very instrumental, along with people like Ted Rice and some other people in the field who were very helpful to me in the beginning of my journey. So I always appreciate them. Thank you so much, James, for being in the space. James was a colleague and research partner of Barbara Bartholic, and he was a friend of Carla Turner's. And so I very much appreciate him being here. And what I would really like to do today is talk about what ufology was like back in the 1990s. I want to talk about things like Carla's ideas and Barbara's ideas and how these messages got lost. I also want to open up this space very early once we've heard from James and we've heard his history and background, and we start talking on the topics. I would like to open up the space very early on for questions. I know a lot of our spaces this week and in a lot of our recent spaces, we haven't had a lot of time for questions. I want to change that today, especially for this topic of abductions. I want people to come up and just ask any question they might have. I just ask that you just remain respectful. You can ask hard questions as long as they're not antagonistic. And then just housekeeping, James. Tom's been on our spaces before, but James and anyone who's new to the room, I do really try to avoid, especially in experiencer spaces, I would really love to avoid politics or political ideologies. And another topic I like to avoid is the COVID vaccine. And that is just because these two topics can feel like attacks to people. It just shuts people's ears down. They don't want to hear anything after that. And I just think this topic is very, very important. And I would like to see beyond those two topics and talk about abductions today. And I just want to make it a place where everyone can be here and feel safe discussing these things. It's not because I don't have any ideas about politics or because I don't think about politics or ideologies or anything like that. It's just because I like to keep, especially experiencer spaces, just a space where anyone feels free to come up and share and ask questions. When we talk about these things, a lot of times our ears just shut down and we become defensive and we don't want to hear anything else after that. And I just don't want that to be this kind of space today. So I really appreciate that from everyone. James, welcome to the space. Thank you so much for being here. If you could just do a short intro, and then I think I would like to really hear about some of your own personal experiences. And then we'll get into how you met Barbara and Carla. Tom, please feel free to jump in at any time.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Fringe, Tom. It's good to see some friendly faces out there. DA, Parsi, great to see all of you and all the people I've yet to meet and get to know. Thank you for having me on here, Fringe. Well, with me, I had a number of experiences that really kick-started my research career in the early 1990s, late 80s, early 90s. I've always had this in my life. I just didn't have a conceptual background or framework with which to understand it. It was one of those things where when I would have an unusual experience, I'd put it on the back burner, labeled, "Don't worry about it. Figured it out later," right? So that happened a lot throughout my life. I would have nosebleeds when I was a boy. I'd wake up and the pillow would be saturated with blood. On one occasion, this was in San Jose, California, circa 1974, I distinctly remember being immobilized in bed, feeling a very strong presence, and then feeling this very cold, lack of a better term, probe, rod-like probe pushed up my nostril, pushed all the way up. I heard a popping sound, and many people have described this before. I heard and felt a popping sound inside my head, and I blacked out. The next morning, the pillow was just covered with blood, and I was a chronic nosebleeder when I was a boy, and my dreams were often of a UFO alien variety. I would have lots and lots of dreams of alien invasions, of UFOs, of a lot of things I now regard and understand as being part of this phenomenon. One of the things that people need to understand, I'm sure a lot of your listeners already know this, but it's a multifaceted experience. It's not just physical abductions. It's not just the medical procedures that are perpetrated upon us. There's also a consciousness aspect, a astral aspect, and we've heard reports over the years of work, research being done on human consciousness, on the human soul, places like Dulce and elsewhere, where there was a concerted effort to understand all the nuances of consciousness and this astral soul body matrix, all of that. And there's no doubt in my mind that at least some of these ET civilizations have the means to astrally abduct us. So they not only can physically abduct us, physically beam us on board their ships, if you will, but they can take us astrally as well. And the implications of that are profound because they're taking our consciousness with them and abducting it. And then I've had experiences where I'm sure my astral body or one of my energy bodies was taken to another realm, another dimension, if you will, medically worked on still by this fake gray alien being wearing a corny nurse's outfit, corny nurse's hat, a black crooked wig, hideous gray face, some kind of weird hybrid. And they did a number of things to me, including injecting me in the upper right bicep. And what was interesting is when they returned me to my physical body, right at the spot where they had injected my astral bicep, if you will, I felt acute pain and touched it. There was no puncture wound, no puncture hole, but it felt exactly as if some sloppy phlebotomist had stuck a needle right there into my bicep. It really ached as if it had really been in the physical realm injected with some kind of hypodermic needle. So, point being is that they can not only manipulate us physically, but astrally, and somehow the twain meets. They can do things to our astral energetic body or bodies, which have a direct impact on our physical body. So, getting back to my awakening, so-called, 1988 rolls around, and I had another number of experiences. On one occasion, I woke up, I was sliding and bumping along the ceiling of my bedroom, and a white bed sheet was hanging down. And I didn't really understand this till later, but I was probably at the point of being abducted, to wake up. And that happened to me twice, where I'd wake up and the white bed sheet would be hanging down off of me as I was going through the ceiling or sliding along the ceiling. What was interesting was the second time that happened, I was in an extension. We had a classic L-shaped ranch-style house in San Jose, California. Subdivision developments, innumerable houses look the same way, an L-shaped pattern. And so what my folks did was they added an extension behind what used to be the kitchen, and we made it like a family room, and there was an annex to that, and that was my bedroom. So I had a lot of privacy. It was like clear over the other side of the house. And that extension was built. There was a series of wooden, lack of a better term, planks or like 2x4s, except larger, that were at intervals on the ceiling, if you're catching my drift. So it was not a flat, smooth ceiling surface, right? There were these big 2x4s at intervals across from one end of the roof to the other. That's how they built the extension. So when I was sliding across it, I must have already been in the process of, I don't know, dematerializing or getting into a certain density frequency that would enable me to be taken through the ceiling, because as I was sliding along the ceiling, I was not bumping into the 2x4s that were hanging down. I should have been thudding into each one of them, right? But I wasn't. I was sliding across them and eventually taken up. And And I know the sensation of being taken up very well, at least in my case, where I would be facing down, my arms and legs hanging down below me, and it felt as if my back was being pulled up by a huge magnet or a huge vacuum. And so you can just picture me, arms and legs and head hanging down and being lifted up, so to speak, by the small of my back. And then I'd seemingly be going up this tunnel or something, and I would see like lights around me and different colored lights, and then just zoom upwards, and then things would black out. I wouldn't really remember much, but that happened a lot. The sensation of being pulled upwards, and finally culminated in 1990 when I'd come back from a summer work language study program in Germany, in southern Germany, right on the edge of the Rhine River, on the Black Forest there. And the last couple of weeks I was there, I started getting that prodromal feeling that E.B. Lorgan talks about. I was getting that feeling of being watched, observed, creepy feeling. I started sleeping with the lights on again. And, and then a couple of weeks later, I went back home to San Jose, California, flew back, and then I had a series of experiences. On one occasion, a gray ET was looking out at me through my TV set amidst the snow of the TV, because if you remember in the old days, they didn't have 24/7 coverage. The TV stations would sign off, and then it would turn into snow. Well, this gray ET was looking at me through the snow, and somehow zapping my brain with like jolts of electricity or some kind of energy. And that was one occasion. Another occasion, I had a missing time experience. I woke up. The last thing I remember was pulling out of my friend's apartment complex, and then next thing you know, I'm waking up in my car, perfectly parked in front of my house. My body felt like stone, like lead. I couldn't move. I felt so rigid, and I felt electricity or energy coursing through my whole body. And yeah, that was a lousy experience. And then I had a full blown abduction experience with waking up with three reptilian greys in my bedroom, and these were reptilians, hybrids, a variant seemingly between the greys and the reptilians, and they had the big bulbous heads and they had the black eyepieces. But beneath the black eyepieces, I'm pretty sure you would have seen the vertical pupils. And when I talked to Carla Turner about this experience, because I had read in her book Into the Fringe, where they were describing beings like this, their neighbor and friend, a guy they called Fred in the book, had encounters with these types of beings, and Carla Turner referred to the hands as chicken claws because they were not fingers with nails on them. They were just claws, like chicken claws, exactly. As that's how Carla described them, and that's exactly what I saw. And I remember laying there, immobilized, looking up at the ET, then looking down at these clawed hands, and just totally, just frightened. And there's a lot of things that happened in the bedroom. Then they took me up into their ship, and things really unraveled from there. Woke up the next day, I was a basket case, as you can imagine. But it was my curiosity. I wouldn't say my curiosity overrode my fear, but my curiosity and my fear level, trepidation, combined to motivate me to read everything I could about the subject. In the past, I was always interested in the subject as a boy. The Bermuda Triangle, other dimensions, Bigfoot, UFOs, Atlantis, all that stuff interested me. And over years, as you grow older, you start to have other interests, sports, music, what have you. And although intermittently these things, I was one of those guys where things would psychically happen to me. I have friends that, bless their souls, they have almost nightly experiences, and oftentimes fully conscious nightly experiences. And I don't know how I wouldn't know how to cope with something like that. With me, my experiences were always cyclical. Every few years, every several years, I'd have a series of experiences in a relatively short period of time. So, and if looking back, that's how I would have preferred it rather than having almost nightly experiences. But in this process of reading and everything else, I devoured Bud Hopkins' books. I read as many of the Betty and Andreessen books that I could find. The Watchers was one of the key books I've ever read about the subject. It's a great example, a great depiction of a particular alien culture that Betty and Andreessen, the late great, was interacting with. And Then, a pivotal point in my life, I left San Jose, California, which I considered back then, I don't know about now, but back then I considered to be a relative backwater of UFO research. There was very little interaction, networking going on between the individual researchers. They were very territorial. What do you want to talk to my abductees about? They're my abductees, right? Well, I just want to compare notes. I mean, that was my attitude. That was my agenda. So eventually I moved to San Diego and I became a member in good standing of the San Diego UFO Society. And from there, I began networking with other people, other researchers. And in the process, I got to know E.B. Lorgan and Barbara Bartley through a series of serendipitous events, really. And then that began a long period of time where I networked and researched with Barbara Bartlett over the phone. We would send each other information, and that's where my research really took. It went to the next level because I became aware early on in my time in the San Diego UFO Society, talking with other researchers, other abductees, that there was a great deal of activity in the high desert of Southern California, that whole vast region encompassing China Lake in the Ridgecrest area, Edwards Air Force Base in the Mojave Desert, the former George Air Force Base in Victorville. We were investigating an underground base in the Victorville Apple Valley area, where a number of us later were being taken underground. There was a deep black element of naval intelligence working there, and they had reptilians underground in that facility. They also had exotic craft, which were described as looking somewhat kite-like. And we'd been taken into this facility on a number of occasions, put through our paces, trained. I'd drawn sketches of some parts of this facility. Some parts of it, you could see there was like catwalks, kind of like a lattice catwalk thing overhead. In certain parts of the facility, there were what seemed to be like swimming pools, what we used to call in the old days in America, doughboy type swimming pools. These were not in-ground swimming pools; they were above ground, and you fill them up with water. And for some reason, they had a number of these at this particular facility, at least a part of it, right? And so they would take us there. They would also take us underground into the underground cavern and stream system and a riverine system and show us some of the flora and the fauna. This was the Navy doing this to us, right? And then when I did my life inventory, I realized not only had I had ET experiences all my life, but going back to an early age, I was often taken. My parents were unwitting, an unwitting party to this because I had a problematic childhood as far as health was concerned. And in the Uniform Code of Military Justice, when a high-ranking doctor, officer, tells an enlisted uh, person how to go about the medical treatments for their dependents, me, in this example, well, the enlisted man in the my example, my father, says yes, sir, and follows the directions, right? And my mom being a dutiful Navy wife, she did what the doctors asked, which included giving me these sedative pills at the onset of these long road trips to Oak Knoll Naval Hospital, which I later found out was a notorious mind control center. Some of the medical facilities I was taken to as a child turned out to be notorious mind control centers. Oak Knoll Naval Hospital in the San Francisco Bay Area, Naval Medical Center in Balboa Park, San Diego, the Presidio Army Letterman General Hospital, which people in our field often hear about. Michael Aquino had an operation there. I was taken to that Army Hospital, Letterman General Army Hospital in the Presidio on a number of occasions and had a missing time experience there as well. So it was only later when I started having all these MyLab experiences, either individually or with a group of others, when I look back and I realized I had this odd medical history as well. But then things started to kind of fall into place. And getting back really quickly to my involvement with Barbara Bartley, and then I'd love to hear input from everyone. It was in my research efforts and my networking with other abductees that I realized there's a big reptilian operation in the high desert of Southern California, really all over the place, but really concentrated in places near Edwards Air Force Base, China Lake, etc., etc. Eve Lorgan and I began networking with MyLabs up there. We found a friend of ours up there named Joyce Spivey, who's since passed away. She had a MyLab support group. up there in the Victorville high desert area, and Evie and I, uh, at least once, twice a month, would go up there and hang out with these other MyLabs, and they tell us stories about their experiences with reptilians and also with the military. And one gal that I became friends with, and Evie and I became friends with, was a gal named Lorena Smith, who's also been on my show, and she's had a lifetime of experiences, reptilian experiences, military experiences. I spent a lot of time in her house doing field investigations. Reptilians used to come out of the closets, the wardrobes, as you people in the UK and Australia would call it. Reptilians would come right out of these closets, and that was just one of the portal entries. There was other portal entries around the house. And so on one occasion I woke up, I was laying on a sleeping bag on the floor, and there was a big reptilian looming over me. And another occasion, the reptilians followed me back to San Diego. I'd driven 2.5 hours from the high desert back to San Diego, and that night, after I'd spent like a whole weekend at Lorena's place, I woke up to find what I thought was at first was a very tall soldier in a khaki uniform roll me over on my side and plunge a needle into the base of my spine. The next day, I had a terrific headache. I went to work anyway. I worked in communications at the time at Commander Naval Air Force's U.S. Pacific Fleet at Naval Air Station North Island. I went to work anyway, had a terrific headache, sweating profusely, explosive diarrhea, pardon the profanity and pardon the Anunnaki, but explosive diarrhea. And my back was aching so much that I would go into this annex room of the office I worked at, and there was no one there at the time. And I would just lay on my back to flatten my back out because I was in so much pain. And eventually, I went to an urgent care unit. They examined, they saw the needle mark in the base of my spine, and they gave me some antibiotics. And it turned out that I was talking to Lorena, and she told me that while I was going through that, with the diarrhea, the back pain, the headaches, the profuse sweating, her husband at the time and her son at the time were going through the exact same symptomology. Okay, I just left her house because I'd spent a weekend there doing investigations, and then came back home, and the reps, did this to me. It was only the next morning when I woke up and I was trying to figure out what happened that night. At first, I thought I was sure it was a very tall military guy, but then when I really thought about it and the images became more clear in my mind, I realized that it wasn't a tall soldier in khaki. It was a reptilian, what we would call like a yellow belly with a lighter uh, underside, like a yellow or whitish or cream-colored underside. And in my memory, I could see the tail of it swishing around behind it, and that told me that okay, that wasn't a soldier because it was standing upright and it had a tail swishing around it. So anyway, that just kind of gives you an idea. And also, I become close associates with Barbara, and she bestowed upon me up to that point already 3 decades worth of reptilian research and alien abduction research. And it should be pointed out that within the UFO alien abduction field, researching reptilians was almost like a taboo subject because Barbara, in many ways, was seen as a pariah in the abduction field. Bud Hopkins used to say dismissively, "Oh, lizard people, go talk to Barbara Bartley." Right? He would say that dismissively, and David Jacobs had a similar attitude. Right? They didn't want to hear about reptilians; they just wanted to keep it on grays, hybrids, and grays. What I call the gray areas of alien abduction research. We cannot leave the reptilians, the mantis beings, and other players out of the mix. We have to go where the information leads us. And then if that leads you into places like underground processing plants that Barbie talked about, missing 411 type cases, we have to look at those seriously because if you ask me, our entire species has been under predation for a long time. We have been farmed, as Charles Ford would have said way back when. And I don't want to have a seemingly a glass half empty attitude about it because I'm very much a glass half full type. But I don't believe that we should look at this with blinders because for too long in the alien abduction research, reptilian studies was considered to be fringe, even within what was regarded as a fringe field. It was a fringe within a fringe. But now, and I've been trying to do for some time now, is put the whole reptilian issue front and center because they are major players, as are the mantis beings. So anyhow, I just thought that I'd get that out, and anything you folks want to say.
Thank you, James. I appreciate all of that and a little bit of history. One thing I wanted to touch on, and then we'll get to the hands. Well, number one, I did post up down in the pill and up in the nest a patent that Covetous put out today. It appears to show, and I'm no good at reading these things, but someone else could have a look at it. It appears to show I think it was 2004, a patent for the ability to essentially transfer us or transfer our souls. And so, just for the room in general, people like me and James and Tom, we talk about stuff that sound like science fiction, but I can guarantee you, to me, James and Tom, and to Randy, and to others, other abductees, these are just things that we speak about because these are the things that are happening. These are the things we're going through. It sounds very much science fiction. We're already in an area of science fiction when we talk about UFOs. But then when it comes to abductions, people just shut down. They cannot wrap their minds around the actual crazy that it takes to come out and speak about abductions. We literally sound insane. We sound like we're part of some type of conspiracy theory that you heard from Q. And the fact is it's not just a conspiracy theory. There's going to be some truth there. And so when we're talking like this, everything James is saying, I can completely and 100% relate to. But there are people in the room that are just going to always have a hard time with understanding how this is even possible in the world. We can see, and we can see and process with our senses. So I appreciate everyone hanging in there. Anyone who wants to ask a question, it can be a hard question. I just ask that you're respectful. And I do want to get to hands super early, James. Tom, please jump in here anytime you like. One thing, James, don't be afraid of the doom in this room. If I would like to start touching on topics like Ted Rice talks about. Ted is somewhat skeptical about the breeding program. He thinks it's possibly just a cover for the feeding program. And then, James, I also want to just touch on, I think Melinda Leslie actually investigated your MyLabs. Do you have a story there?
Yes, I know Melinda from way back, and it wasn't so much that well, no, I told her about my MyLab experiences, but also in about 6 hours, one afternoon on the weekend, she sat with me and briefed me on what had been going on to her. And you're probably familiar with the story. She was abducted and taken in a long ride in the back of a big rig, it seemed, or a van of some kind. And it was an underground highway system that she was in. And eventually she was taken to what we believe was China Lake. And that was just one of her MyLab experiences. But yes, I'm somewhat familiar, not really familiar with what has happened to Melinda lately, but back then, like in the late 90s, early 2000s, I was somewhat familiar with the experiences she'd had. And to answer your question, yes, I'd shared a lot of my experiences with her.
And then, James, right before we get to hands, are these conscious memories, regressed memories, a combination? Can you explain that really quickly?
Well, it's a combination. Some of them were even within the context of an experience where one has full waking consciousness. There are times during that particular experience when they may have like a blackout moment or the next thing I remember, right? You hear that a lot in uh, conscious recollection as well as in regressions where there seems to be like a blank space and time progressed forward, and then next thing you know, they're coming to an awareness again. So sometimes that happened to me. I would come to an awareness during an experience, at the outset of experience or in the midst of an experience, and sometimes they seem to be like a dream or an astral experience, but others that I was having an experience with, like the aforementioned Lorena Smith, she would tell me, "No, you were there last night. We had an experience. We were taken beneath the underground base, into the underground base. I was trying to tell you it was not a dream. I was letting you touch our surroundings, the furnishings, what have you, in this underground base to show you that it was a real physical experience." Lorena was always one of those people that was able to retain a high degree of conscious awareness in a lot of her experiences. Me, not so much. So, some of my experiences are constantly remembered. Some of them are fragmentary. A lot of them were astral in nature. And a very good point about the patent, because I'm satisfied that for some time now, deep black elements of the military aerospace community can astrally abduct people. It's not just the ETs that are into the astral abduction syndrome. It's by now, for some time now, it's the military has been doing that as well.
Thank you, James. And then I just have one last question. I know I've said that 14 times already. What happened to Carla's message and Barbara's message over the years? Is this a message regarding the dark side of what's happening during abductions? Is this a message that was never accepted, or is this a message that was lost over time?
Well, the whole field, just like so many other aspects of the UFO field, it became atomized. It became fragmented into seemingly rival factions, as you know. I'm not going to go into an elaborate discussion about it, but we know the syndrome where you have a large swath of those claiming ET contact of all sorts, telepathic, psychic, physical, etc., that would fall generally into what one would consider to be a New Age camp, where all ETs are of the warm and fuzzy variety. There are no negative ETs, but they will posit the suggestion that there are bad military elements pretending to be bad ETs. Okay, that's the Stephen Greer syndrome right there in a nutshell, and Richard Boylan before him. So there were factions within factions, and a lot of Barbie's research had to do with the real hardcore negative aspects of it, because that's what people were reporting to her. That's what she was getting from a lot of people who didn't know each other, that there are these underground processing plants. And I've had a number of people on my show. I've had a gal who calls herself Sashida, and I've had David Eckhart on my show, and I've spoken to others who told me about these underground processing plants, where humans, for lack of a better term, of all ages, are being harvested essentially. Their vital essences, their bodily fluids, not just energetically, not just in a loose harvesting sense, but in a very real physical sense, that they're being used as a food source. And when people rebel at that thought, just stop and think about where we think we are. We think we're at the top of the food chain. We have factory farms and what have you, and put all these animals through unimaginable agony just to consume them, right? So who's to say that something like this, the tables had not been turned on us? Because if you go into the lore of all these ancient peoples, First Nation peoples around the world, this is a very common theme, that these, in the folkloric tradition, a lot of it had to do with subterranean civilizations or subterranean beings coming up and taking people away. But also there's a long-standing tradition of fairies and other beings that seemingly come down from the sky and abduct people too. So it was the hardcore aspects of the research which I gravitated towards, and that's where the twain met, because that's what Barbie had been doing all along. Carla Turner had been doing that, and then me and Eve Lorgan connected with Barbie, and that began a fruitful alliance for many years. So definitely, it's the more hardcore aspects of this field that really need to be explored, and the hybridization aspect of that. I'm absolutely convinced that's happening, because the hybrid plantation managers of this world, and we know them by their reputation, we know them by what they get up to. At least we have an idea of what they get up to under sordid ceremonies and rituals, what have you. There's nothing human about that, remotely human. It's very inhuman. Just look at their behaviors. Look at what they profess to be their beliefs. They're completely different from us. They may superficially look like us, but and my understanding of these hybrids is that many of them are reptilian Draco hybrids. Not all, but many of them are. And many of the players that we see in front of the camera, but also behind the scenes, that are not so well known to the public eye, they are these reptilian human hybrids, and they have a direct line consciously in their own information field, a form of hive consciousness, that they can plug into this information field and know everything about us, of our memories, even our past incarnations, if people want to go there, right? So this is a multifaceted subject, and if we look at it through a filter, and filter out things that we don't like or find unsettling, we're doing ourselves a disservice, and we'll just be running in place. The window is closing. We really need to get on board and move this research forward. to get to an operational stage. There's got to become a point in time when we reacquire enough of these innate metaphysical abilities many of us have, which is why certain alien groups and certain military groups are abducting certain people in the first place. Because these MyLabs, if you will, they have a certain DNA profile. There's something about their morphic resonance field that is of interest. That there's latent metaphysical powers, for lack of a better term, to be had and exploited within certain bloodlines, and they do this all the time within their own cult family circles. But increasingly, they've cast a wide net into society, trying to find people that have these innate abilities, and then they have a way of engendering these abilities, exploiting them within the context of an alien abduction or a military experience. And then when they return us, a lot of times we can't consciously summon these abilities, but they have a means of doing it. So that leaves us in this uncomfortable situation where, against our will, without even realizing it, we may be used as assets to advance their agenda. And I don't think that's right at all. I think what we need to do is detach from them as much as possible, reacquire the ability and the know-how to utilize these abilities for ourselves and turn this thing around. I think that we all have that within us. We all have the means to reacquire our latent metaphysical abilities. I'll just leave it there for now.
Thank you, James. I couldn't agree with you more. I promised to get to hands early, and I've already asked you 15 questions, so I'm going to go right to Eric. Eric, go ahead.
Hey, James, a couple quick questions. Were you by chance in the South San Jose Almaden Valley when you were, because that's my hometown?
Well, I know the place well, not as well as you, because I'm more of a North San Jose guy, the Berryessa, Hofstadter Road.
Okay, Berryessa,
Capitol
yeah,
Avenue.
okay.
I mean, they had a lot of experience.
Yes.
But your neck of the woods, there's a lot of weird, spooky activity there. A lot of underground bases. That whole area, Camden, yeah. Cupertino, they have underground tunnel systems there. So yes, I'm somewhat familiar, and a lot of my experiences happened in San Jose. So I've always regarded that place with some degree of trepidation and dread, actually.
My other question would be, there's a guy, are you on Facebook, James?
Yes.
There's a guy named Robert who lives in Ohio. I'm not going to say his last name, but you might know him. He tells a very similar story about his experiences. I would say he's about 72 now. Do you know what I'm talking about? He talks about going underground at Edwards. Everything you said, pretty much, he says the same thing. I don't know if you know this guy or not.
No, I mean, I'd like to get to know him better, because that's right up my alley. Because I've actually, in the past, I used to do astral break-ins, which I don't recommend. There was a time in the early mid-90s and then also late 90s, early 2000s when I used to make a point of astrally breaking into some of these underground facilities, one of which was the north facility of Edwards Air Force Base. I went under there in my astral body, and interesting point, they have astral countermeasures, okay? So they take into account the possibility that there could be astral spies lurking about, and they actually have set up astral countermeasures to deal with them. I'll just leave it at that. But yes, I'd like to know more about this Robert guy.
Okay, one more quick thing. I've been doing a lot of research. If I make a little laugh sound, it's not because it's funny. It just kind of blows my mind. My friend John Polk, who lives in Sedona, Arizona, he doesn't talk about it really publicly, but he's told me a few times that he's a reptilian hybrid, and he has these experiences where he's probed in the nose, anally, and anyway, he was the guy that told me in 2016, after I'd met him for the first time, that I was going to start seeing UFOs, and that's why I'm even interested in the topic. But going to where I wanted to go is there's an area in Temecula, and if you go over the mountain range, up on the top up there, I can't think of the name. It's a very small town, about 200 people, and there's a Navy training center up there that is totally guarded, like Area 51. And then right next to the training Navy center, which is in the mountains, by the way, is a Indian reservation. And then if you go down the mountain, there's Borrego Springs. But that whole area up there, I just get a tremendous vibe because of the way the rocks are and the rock structures. And anyway, are you familiar with that area?
Yes, I'm somewhat familiar with ends of Borrego. There, east of San Diego, there is a covert not so covert, because people that pay attention can see all the military activity. But there's a lot of military activity in the mountain ranges to the east, in the high desert east of San Diego, headed towards Anza Borrego. And on one occasion, this is kind of a funny story, I'll relate it really quickly. When I was in communications, we had this, believe it or not, it was called a Majestic color printer. And it was very advanced at the time. They used to buy these things and put them on the aircraft carriers, right, for the information centers. But anyway, a lot of Navy people, they don't make much money in the Navy, so they have these jobs on the side, right, these other businesses. So this Navy commander came in there, and he had these photographs, because he was into real estate, right, speculation. So he had these photographs of property in east of San Diego, in that area we're talking about, right? And so here I am. I produced these copies for him. Then I noticed there's an object hovering above this mountain range. So I kept zooming in, expanding the image more and more and more. And before long, I realized it was a huge saucer. It was a huge flying saucer hovering over this place, which I'd known from experience, and I did field investigations there on one occasion, right? Where there is a covert similar to the East Foothills in San Jose, where there's a lot of covert military activity, a lot of double-rotored Chinook helicopters flying in and out of that area. Similar thing here east of San Diego. And also, you talked about Temecula. I'm familiar with that area. There are Murrietas nearby. There's not only a naval facility there. There's also a naval facility, and it's not too far as the crow flies, actually, where Evie Lorgan used to live. There was also in the mountain ranges behind where she lived. She lived near Temecula, not too far from Temecula. There was a naval weapons station where they kept ordnance there, and every once in a while, the locals would hear explosions and hear, and feel the rumbling of the ground. So there was a lot of stuff going on not too far from where Evie lived, and I'm familiar somewhat with what you're talking about there in Temecula and Murrieta. There's some kind of naval facility there. And another place that people need to focus on also is there in San Juan Capistrano, inland from the coast. I don't know what they're called now. They used to be called TRW and other aerospace corporations. They had facilities there. And what some of the locals, including a good friend of mine, would see was gigantic plasma balls just hovering low in the atmosphere above these facilities, whether that was some kind of alien visitation or something to do with experimentation or work being done at the facility, we don't know, right? But Southern California is just full. There's just a bunch of these types of places where this kind of activity goes on. So yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with the stuff that you're talking about, Eric. Thank you for sharing that.
Tom, do you have anything to add to what we've talked about so far?
Well, I just wanted to back up James. Oh, hey, James.
Hey,
Nice
buddy,
to finally see you in space. Pretty good. Yeah, so, well, real quick, for anyone who doesn't know, like me and James, we've known each other for right around 20 years or so. We've done a few podcast interviews together and several roundtables. I highly respect him as a battle-hardened experiencer, and especially as a veteran researcher who's, one of the OGs from the 90s. So that's when I got my start, but he's had like 100 times more connections and done more research than I have in this field. So he's definitely the hardcore guy to go to on this topic. I wanted to back him up on what you said about the gray and reptilian hybrids, because I've seen those between 1982 and 1984 when I was like a little toddler. I've seen them several times, and it happened in central Germany during that time period. And I remember them having not the black eye covers on, but I did see the vertical pupil slits.
Yes. Sometimes they don't wear them. Sometimes they don't wear the eyepieces.
Yeah, I haven't quite figured out when they do and when they don't, because these were daytime abductions, so you'd figure they'd be more sensitive to it. But yeah, apparently they didn't have them on. And these ones, they had, like, the ones that I saw at least, they had darker gray skin and more of like a reptilian mouth feature versus the typical grays. And they also seemed to be in charge of the other grays that were coming for me during that time period. So it was based on that I concluded, just from my memory alone, that, okay, well, there's grays and then there's this gray reptilian thing. then there's probably actual reptilians as well. And this is before I came across any other like reptilian related research. So I just wanted to kind of back you up on that.
Thank you.
And I have a lot of reptilian experience as well. I mean, even when I compare my experiences to someone, Tom, like Amy, we have a lot of similarities. I can hit her up and say, hey, have you seen this? Have you seen that? And yet we do have some major differences because I deal with a lot of reptilian and she has, not in her conscious memory anyway, she doesn't have reptilian. So James and Tom, I would love to know, what do you think this is? What is this difference? Is this factions that are more cooperative with the military, industrial complex, or do you see these as cooperating factions? I'd love to hear from both of you on that, and then we'll go to some more questions.
Yeah, go ahead, James.
Yeah, my thoughts on that are there are definitely factions, there are definitely alliances, if you will, between certain ET groups and affiliated military human groups. They may not all be one consolidated monolithic block. There may be factions, empires within empires, if you will. And I think that, and I was talking to Barbara Rothlick about this very subject, some people only have conscious recollections of the Greys, in our example. But sometimes, when Barbara has worked with people like that, and this is not because of any preconceived bias of Barbara's, it's because she was trained by a world-class hypnotic regressionist. And so she knows how to get past the walls and blockages. Usually, you have the initial screens and amnesic barriers that the abductee has, and then there's certain levels of screens and false memories that are set up specifically to fool or foil the hypnotic regressionist. So they actually have to get past two levels. You got to get past the level of the amnesic barrier of the abductee himself or herself, and then get past another level where typically, and this plays also to the particular biases of a particular hypnotic regressionist. If they're used to or have a bias towards the notion that aliens are friendly, all of them, and that a lot of this has to do with our spiritual evolution, etc. When they regress somebody, they're likely to come up at times with a series of events or unremembered experiences, previously unremembered experiences, which would reinforce that bias, reinforce that belief. Okay, and point being is that what Barbara and other hypnotic regressionists have found is, for those who often, and I'm not saying this is the case with any of your listeners, I'm just saying this is what's been reported, that once the layers have been peeled back, it turns out that these people are not having experiences only with Greys. That when you peel back the layers in some of their previously unremembered experiences, which come up under regression, and then afterwards more memories start to surface, they find themselves at times not just with Greys, but with other ET races as well. It's not unusual for someone to be having experiences with Greys, and that's all they remember initially, and then a little further down the track, they see Greys and other beings, insectoids, or like a brown-toned or brown-skinned type of being that's similar in outline, shape as a Grey, classic typical Grey, but not quite, right? Like a variation. So a lot of times people will be abducted and they won't remember they're taken to see other beings besides the Greys. All they remember are the medical procedures. All they remember is the Greys coming into their bedroom or taking them while they're driving in their car, etc. But oftentimes behind that, if one really, really digs and peels away the layers, they will find that that person has had experiences with reptilians, mantis beings, etc., etc. The reptilians and the mantis beings like to stay in the background. They're perfectly content in many cases, not always, but in many cases, of letting the Greys under their control, or they have some kind of alliance with. I would suggest that the Greys are some kind of cosmic vassals. Some of the Grey factions are, that they seem to do a lot of the heavy lifting and a lot of the legwork for some other beings like reptilians and mantis beings and Nordic beings as well. Excuse me. So, point being is, and to wrap it up, is that yes, I've heard stories where people say that they've only had encounters with Greys. But my suspicion, my belief would be that if they peeled back the layers, they would find that they've had more than just those experiences, because they instill so many amnesic barriers within us. I mean, so many. We've had a lot more experiences than we realize, and so it's very difficult unless you have a really skilled regressionist who can get past the blocks set up specifically for the regressionist. Then what may come out would be the typical, you know, type of experience that many people have already described.
Yeah, so I sometimes I look at it as the Greys as being the workers, and then I come across a lot of hybrids and human looking. But then it seems like the mantis are the brains and the reptilians are the brawn. To me, it just seems like you don't maybe get to the reptilians until you've caused a problem. Let's go to Randy. Randy, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, James. James, you just really shocked me when you brought up the closet portal because I thought nobody knew about this. I know a woman down in Southern California that she was giving her daughter a PJ sandwich, and the daughter kept on coming. You probably know about this case because since you know about the porthole. And the daughter kept coming back for another sandwich. She's just like, what's going on? My daughter's had like about five of these sandwiches in her bedroom. She kept on asking for more. So finally, the mother opened up the daughter's bedroom door, and she saw this reptilian coming out of the closet, and the daughter was befriending this beast. And she said, "Oh my God," you know. And then I think she told somebody, and so then the military actually came to her house and gave her an injection to wipe her mind. Do you know this case, James? You
Yes,
know
that's
the
my
post.
that's my friend
Okay,
Lorena.
okay, yes.
I didn't
I
mind.
didn't want to drop her name because it's kind
Yeah,
of I told her I would never say her name. And so yes,
no, no,
okay,
it's okay because I've had her on my show before under her real name, and
yes,
there's a funny backstory to that because I kind of
uh,
cop this attitude towards corporations. Okay, I won't get political, but when Monsters and Mysteries in America, I think that was the name of the show, they kept kind of contacting me to go on the show about a segment of about reptilians, right? And I kind of adopted. I regret it now. This kind of high and mighty. Well, you're the corporate media. It's like, it's not going to come out right, and then you're going to make me look like a fool, et cetera, et cetera. Well, no, they didn't. They actually did a very good docudrama representation of what Lorena went through, right? And so instead of me adding my commentary, they got Nick Redfern to do it. But that's my fault because I was too much of a hard ass. But anyway, I know the story because see, that little girl is an adult now, and she has an older sister, and I mean, I watched these girls grow up basically, and I don't know how much they consciously recall of that time, but the youngest daughter at the time, she'd had this invisible friend, right? Now,
right,
parents being parents, despite all the experiences Lorraine has had with the reptilians, the military, et cetera, when her own daughter, in the same house, was saying, "I got this little, invisible friend," she
exactly.
kind of took it like a grain of salt, which is funny. But she kept hearing um, when there was no one in the child's bedroom, she kept hearing these chimes, these tones, because her daughter had this little toy that looked like a telephone, and it had instead of like numbers, it had like letters on it. So you would press a letter and make a certain tone, but it looked like a
Yeah,
phone. And anyway, when there was no children in there, she would hear that constantly in that bedroom. And it turned out that it was a little immature reptoid that was fascinated that was sitting there pressing the buttons, right? Anyway, Lorena comes in with a plate with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. She looks down, her daughter is sitting Indian style with this little reptoid. They're both playing with that phone tone thing, and the little reptile makes this kind of squealing pig noise and runs straight into the closet and disappears, right? And it's not just closets, but also the space beneath stairwells. If you're familiar with the Harry Potter saga, and if you've seen the movies, Harry was relegated to that, little room space beneath the stairwell at his Muggle's parents' house at the beginning. Well, the aliens or interdimensionals, whatever the case may be, they sometimes will use the space beneath the stairwells as an entry point. And sometimes, not only at an entry point like that, but other places around the house, they can sometimes leave a residue. For some reason, I don't know if it's a result and after effect of the
Like a
process of
smear, right?
a
Like a
smear,
smear.
like somehow the ether, and Tom knows a lot more about this than I do, but this all relates to ether physics, right? Uh, when they tickle the ether the way they do, ingress and egress through these portals, sometimes they leave this kind of residue. It's kind of been described as like a sticky, brownish kind of looking, like icky stuff, like on the walls where these portal entries are. Okay, so those of you listening, keep that point in mind. If you have a place in your house that you suspect, and sometimes these portals are in midair, like they could be right at the foot of the bed, they could be right above the bed. They're not
They can be
limited.
vertical,
They can
overhead.
be vertical, exactly. Or, and this is what's funny also, not really funny, but like a lot of abductees, subconsciously, they like to put their bed up against one wall, kind of like subconsciously, I'm guarding at least one flank, right? It doesn't work because the ETs sometimes come through walls, right? But point being is that, you know, uh, so they can come through a hole in the wall, a portal in the wall. They can come. They can create a portal in midair. They can create a portal underneath your bed. So, I mean, and for a long time now, I'm satisfied. Deep black elements in the military are into the portal teleportation business. There's no doubt by this point in my mind that that's been going on for some time.
See,
I
then
have.
I'm
Oh,
sorry.
sorry, Randy, are you still going?
I, yeah, I was going to say there's another case I know of a woman was trying to get to her apartment, and they were coming from out of the sewers into the sidewalk, and her boyfriend had to get a golf club and try to beat the creature back down into the sewer, and so it's just kind of crazy. These things are all underground.
Yes, that's from the same segment of Monsters and Mysteries in America, and that was about how certain reptilian species, and they're not all the same. Certain reptilian species were residing in the sewer systems and the tunnel systems beneath Los Angeles, which kind of jibes with the ancient Indian lore of that region, which states that beneath modern day Los Angeles is a vast reptilian underground city. And also I'm satisfied something similar exists beneath Las Vegas. That's a whole nother story.
Thank
So,
you, James.
thank you, Randy and James. I'm just going to throw it out there. I have had that substance on my body, actually. I want to go to Tiff. Tiff, go ahead.
Oh, you can get to the other hands. I just got back. I had a question for him earlier, but the mountains took out my signal. So go get the other hands. I'll be here.
All right, Tiff's not going anywhere. I don't know what the order was, so I'm just going to go to experience.
I do know the order. I think we have Crumbopulus and then Experience. Then Nick popped out, and then it would be Eric.
Correct.
So Crumbopulus, go ahead, man.
Yeah, thanks for the space, guys. Amazing job to everyone involved in UFO Twitter Week so far. It's been awesome. Yeah, James, amazing story. Thanks for being here. I hope you stick around X for a lot longer so we can talk to you a little bit more, ask you more questions. But yeah, it takes a great deal of courage to share things like this, and it makes me feel better about some of the things that I've experienced. I'm sure many other people feel that way. You already answered this for the most part, but I'm sure you've explored this so much. Like, as far as the repressed memories go, is it repressed memories or is it amnesia due to sensory overload? Is it memory wipe or like false memory implants? Or even is it like an unconscious thing where you're actually unconscious during this? That's my first question.
I think it's a combination. I mean, the short Cliff Notes answer is it's definitely a combination. Some people just it's easier for whatever reason for memories to stay submerged or repressed in certain people, and you see this in people who had experienced some kind of trauma, car accident, traumatic brain injury, stuff like that, or something has happened that was so emotionally painful, and I don't even want to speculate on what that could be, but something so emotionally painful that they just block out a lot of the stuff. So we have this innate ability anyway, but it seems that for a long time these ETs and other beings, they seem to have the means to, lack of a better term, conduct externally imposed amnesia, right? And also with that, a a screen memory, right? Where, and this has happened to me, where I'd be laying in bed and I'd have a dream, or at any rate some kind of a movie playing out in my mind's eye, and what it usually would involve would be playing with, like, a dog that I used to own a long time before that maybe just passed away, or playing with a bunch of puppies, or some kids want to come along and roughhouse and play. And what I've come to understand is when I'm having those kinds of dreams of a bunch of puppies snowballing me and dogpiling me, what it's doing is it's kind of masking the the sensations I'm feeling, which are being jostled. I'm being jostled. I'm being rolled over. I'm being touched and poked and prodded in different places. But in my mind's eye, like, there's a bunch of Cocker Spaniel puppies just jumping all over me. I love dogs, right? So, and then I realized that that wasn't really a dream of little Cocker Spaniel puppies, like, climbing all over me. What they were doing was they were creating that image in my mind to kind of explain away them having to roll me over on my tummy, touch me here and there, but in my mind's eye, I'm playing with a bunch of puppies. You see what I mean? So there's
Gotcha.
variations of this theme, and also if they want to get, like, into the sexual aspects of it as well, like, uh, and especially those who've had reptilian experiences. Now, one thing that I do know is that when I first heard about reptilians, I had an innate knowingness that they are absolutely real and they are major players in this, right? And then along the way, I picked up other clues and other sources of information that validated that. But I just always knew that there was always a reptilian element, and in some cases, when people consciously go in a reptilian investigation direction, that's when the reptilians make their presence felt. It's like, okay, you know about us, here we are, back the f off, right? And a lot of people do, and no shame attached. So there's because we're sexual beings by nature, we're going to be manipulated at times in the reproductive areas, sexually, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that they'll do is, in the example of a male, let's say a male abductee, he finds himself in an astral dreamscape scenario. He's the atmosphere, if you will, seems highly charged sexually. He's close to or at a state of arousal, and what they'll do sometimes is they'll present an image of a very desirable woman, right? A very desirable woman, and it seems, through body language and other indicators that, this desirable woman is very willing to do certain things. Let's say, right, and say if the guy is starting to explore the possibility, wow, look at this beautiful girl. I don't care if it's a dream or not, right? Um, but what will happen sometimes? Say if he's caressing her skin. He caresses her skin in one direction, smooth, right? He caresses her skin in the other direction, not so smooth. In fact, scaly. Okay, and then he'll go, "Whoa!" If he's familiar at all with how reptilians operate, and he's had experiences with them in the past, because they count on us to dismiss or purposely forget unsavory, embarrassing things, and we should never, never throw out and intentionally forget about degrading, sordid, embarrassing things, because it's part of our human condition when we're going through the syndrome. And it's important to do a proper debrief. That's what I used to do. No matter what kind of humiliating, degrading things the reptilians and other ET beings did to me, I always had a safe outlet with Barbie Bartley or Evie Lorgan, right? I would just unburden my soul to them, right? So in our example, the guy strokes her skin in another direction, not so smooth, very scaly. And the guy goes, whoa, tries to make himself wake up. Suddenly he's scratched. Suddenly he feels probing in his rectal area, right? So that's an example, and it ties in with the illusions of little puppies crawling all over you to kind of explain away the jostling and the sensations one feels when they're being medically examined, right? Or other things are going on. And so, in our example, the guy thinks he's going to be having, intercourse with a desirable woman. Turns out it's not a woman. And the moment he realizes it's not a woman, he starts getting clawed and he starts getting rectally probed. Okay, so now what would have happened if he just went along with it and didn't realize, okay, this gal is kind of scaly, right? And he just went along with it. Well, I spoke to a guy. He had a 6-month torrid love affair with what he perceived to be this beautiful Palladian kind of space woman, right? And then 6 months into this torrid love affair, get this, for whatever reason, the illusion wears off, and he finds himself having intercourse with what we used to call a brown yellow belly. Again, some of the reptilians, like alligators and crocodiles in our world, they have this lighter underside. And so we just generically refer to them, some of us do, as yellow bellies, right? But they could be cream colored or white, whatever the case may be. This was a brown, for the most part, brown scaly all the way around, and a lighter belly. But that's who he had been having sex with for 6 months. It wasn't this blonde-haired Palladian babe. Okay, it was a reptilian. And what's interesting, and I'll leave it at this. I know you got another question. Um, some of them seem to manifest a hermaphroditic quality, where in our example, and I've spoken to many males about this, that where we can just share stuff mano a mano about some of the reptilian kind of degrading sexual things that some of us have gone through, right? In a proper debrief scenario, no shame, no guilt attached. Let's just put it on the table, right? What happens sometimes is, if the person finds out that, okay, I'm not having intercourse with this desirable human female, it's this reptilian female, suddenly somehow, some way, that reptilian female supposedly can somehow start trying to sodomize them too. So either it grows an appendage, right, and it doesn't feel like a talon or a finger or something like that. It feels like a member. It feels like an appendage of like a male member, let's say. So somehow, and a lot of the astral dreamscape sexual manipulation, depending on what they have in store or how they're trying to condition, behaviorally modify a given male abductee in our example, they may add aspects of hermaphrodism. The sky's the limit in order to change the orientation of the person. And Barbara was a pioneer long before the surface level, what we're seeing now, this gender bending and all this other stuff that's going on. Long before that, Barbara had determined in her research that they're manipulating a significant swath of the surface level population, males and females, in order to get them to change their gender identity. That what they would call it now, right? Because she worked with a number of males who went through the whole process, not only getting the hormones, but actually going through the surgical process of becoming a woman. Okay, and I've seen some of these videos, some of these interviews she'd done with the people she worked with, and this was back in the 90s. And there was another program that Barbie became aware of that she called, for lack of a better term, the Breed Out the Love program, where in the womb, probably before the womb, genetic mixing and matching, but certainly after the child is born, incrementally over time, they manipulate the child behaviorally, psychologically, physically, to becoming impulsive, angry, violent, even. And Barbie called it the Breed Out the Love program. When you hear people say, well, yeah, the aliens are really interested in our emotions, what do they really mean by that? And in Barbie's research, in Carla's research, they found that there are times they actually put children, into what amounts to like gladiatorial contest, where they pit them against each other and they induce this sense of rage, uncontrollable rage within one or both of them, and then they just have them battle each other. and I've watched videos of boys, 11, 12 years old, talking about this process of how they make certain children violent, right? And I would guess that some of those children that are doing this to have kind of a higher proportion of reptilian Draco genetics than the rest of the population. So there's already an innate kind of vulnerability, if you will, that these kids have towards going dark side, if you will, like Anakin Skywalker / Jeffrey Dahmer. I mean, the sky's the limit. Every single serial murderer you ever hear of, every kind of cult member murderer you ever hear of, without exception, there's some kind of hybrid, whether reptilian, Draco, insectoid, some kind of combination. They have little or no impulse control, and they're very visually oriented, which makes it very easy in these astral dreamscape manipulations. Waking consciousness, but also astral dreamscape manipulations, where they can just flood their mental imagery with images of sadistic gore, etc., tied in with the sexual component. Okay, because if you look at these cult behaviors, who the hell is going to get sexually aroused when there's all these recently murdered bodies laying around? Right? There's nothing remotely human about that. There's nothing sexually arousing about that. But that's a common feature in these cult scenarios where they kill the sacrificial victims and then they have an orgy afterwards. And you see this in the movie, the Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, when Hunter S. Thompson, who turned out to be a guy who used to go to the Bohemian Grove and was into making snuff films and what have you, in that scene where he's supposedly frying out on acid in the hotel casino, and then Johnny Depp is playing his character. Then he begins to see people in a restaurant disrobing and conducting an orgy, and then he's still tripping out on acid. The next thing you know, he's seeing them not only having an orgy, but all the people in the restaurant turning into reptilians. Okay, and they're having an orgy, a blood orgy, right there in the theater. Now, see, there's an inside joke to that because not many people know that when some people take LSD or psilocybin or something similar, that opens up their etheric third eye vision, and they're able to see the host entities overshadowing the humans. So they're walking along like the Hunter S. Thompson character in the movie, and they can actually see the reptilian host or mantis host or whatever the case may be overshadowing the host human, right? So there's an element of truth to that when he's on acid and he begins to see the orgy, but then he must have got the orgy scene from his experiences in Bohemian Grove and other places, right? Now, that's the irony. Hunter S. Thompson is viewed as some kind of counterculture hero today. He's been on Alex Jones' show. He's not a hero. He was not a hero. He made snuff films. He was a perp. He was a child trafficker, right? So, point being is that it's all about. Sun Tzu said it best, and Tom Montauk knows all about this because I had him on my show, and he did a brilliant job about Sun Tzu. Um, all warfare is based on deception. All warfare. So if you look at it, all the different levels, I don't know if I answered your question, but the screen memories, the false inserts, the intentional blockages for the abductee as well as the regressionists, it's all based on deception. So how could, in any kind of good conscience, could we regard the beings doing this to be friendly or to be here to help us evolve spiritually? I mean, that's a non-starter, if you ask me.
Yeah, you pretty much answered my questions. I appreciate it once again. I guess you can even just make this a yes or no, but so do you think that they're able to, with their consciousness, basically do whatever they want to our consciousness? Or is it by some other means?
Okay, I'll try to get in 20 words or less. There are some cases when they can actually put their consciousness into the consciousness of a human. Essentially, for a time, take them over, okay? And we've seen this in some of the underground bases where MyLabs and project people describe their consciousness being taken out and either a shadow entity put in or an ET comes in and takes them over. And it goes even deeper than that, where in like these cosmic spy games, these MyLabs, but they also have their fair share of ET experiences. Within the context of the ET experiences and the ET civilizations they're interacting with, they can do things where they can take the MyLab abductee's consciousness and put it into an alien being, specifically created and then insert that person, that being, with a human consciousness into an alien scenario, like some kind of hostile spying kind of scenario on board of it, like a spaceship or a big space station. I've heard of similar stories, and I don't discount them because they go into quite detail about how that process is conducted in some ways. But anyhow, I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. Go ahead, guys.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Combo. Tom, do you have anything to add in there?
Well, earlier, getting back to the question of why do these things appear in closets? It's kind of a funny thing that they would even do that. But yeah, I've had experiences like that, and Carissa has had that. Her brother has had that as well. So it's kind of common, actually. And my theory on that is simply that when they're coming in here from another realm or another dimension or timeline, they essentially have to modify the local subtle energy field in order to be able to project a physical form or to open up space time and come through it. And in order to do that, it helps if they have a surrounding physical structure that they can anchor this subtle energy structure to, kind of like a spider web needing a corner in a room, right? So in any sort of like dark space that's enclosed or that has walls around it that they can anchor to, that allows the creation of a more permanent kind of etheric nest, I guess you could call it, which allows a densification of the subtle energy field in order to help precipitate a more physical form in it. So that's part of it. And actually, you find that in other areas, like in demonology or haunted houses. Typically, demons will set up in enclosed spaces, whether it's under the stairs or corners of rooms, or a friend of my family, his kid, his grandma would find him at 2 in the morning in the dark in the basement, laughing and giggling to his friends. And when he asked about it, he said that his friends, they during the daytime, they sleep up in the rafters of the ceiling of the basement where it's dark, and kind of enclosed. And also, you find it in Jewish lore with the Dybbuk box, for example. It's this box that you can lure a demon into, and then you can close it and kind of take it out. So, yeah, I mean, these enclosed spaces being haunted by things, that's definitely something you find all over the place. And it's interesting that you also find it in the field of ufology with, like, reptilian entities and so on.
Thank you, Tom. Jump in, Ulrich.
No, actually, I want to get to hands. I wrote it down. We can save it for later. Experience, man. You've been waiting a while. Welcome.
Peace. James, thank you for sharing. First and foremost, I'm always interested in experiencer accounts, and so my first question is for you specifically, and then the second one, I think you and Tom maybe can jump in. But in some accounts, where it comes to people doing, the background as to why, particularly, they've been abducted. Sometimes I understand that it's generational, so it happens to parents, grandparents, and then the children. Is it specifically, do you think that they're mining material for a specific lineage? Is it a mixed bag? Do you think they're, mining us for specific genetic material, something like that? That's the first question. And then the second question is in regards to actually the mantis being specifically. I have a friend of mine who is an abductee. He's not out in the public, but his experiences with the mantis. And he says he doesn't have a malevolent feeling from them. Not really. He said it's a course relationship. There's a lot of back and forth and pushback from his end, but the work that they do with him is on his what he calls his energy body. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but yeah, I'd like to know your comments on those two questions.
Thanks. Just to recap really quickly what the first one was.
Genetic material.
Oh,
You
yes.
specifically, is there something that stands out maybe in
Well,
your physical that they
I
would
can
want
only
to abduct you?
speculate. I can only speculate, and extrapolating on a number of cases, and comparing it to others. Barbara always said, and it didn't make sense to me until much later, that in some way, shape, or form, everyone, underline everyone on this planet, is impacted by the alien presence. And boy, howdy, the last few years you can see that. But keep that point in mind. Everybody at some level, and her belief, and that's my belief as well, is impacted. Now, when you go to certain demographics, certain family lines, certain generational family trees, there's no doubt in my mind that the ETs, usually more than one group, and increasingly the military, that they are actively seeking out certain people that have a certain genetic profile, certain that Rupert Sheldrake referred to as a M field, morphic resonance field, and this may conflict with some people's religious viewpoints. It doesn't for me. I mean, I consider myself a Christian, more of a Gnostic Christian, but I do believe in reincarnation, and I have good reason to do so, in my view. But it seems to me that some of these archontic entities of various stripes, some of them seem to be aware of who we were before we re-entered this earthly plane. Because I know of cases where my labs were interrogated harshly by the military, and they wanted to know about their previous lives, like their most recently completed, like World War II life, for example. What were they doing during World War II? A gal was telling me this, and they were really interested in what she knew about the Germans and World War II and all this other stuff. So it seems to me that these beings, and I would by this point I would say elements of the military also have an understanding about this. They're also interested in what we bring to the table from our previous incarnations, and I would remind everyone, and this is just my view of it, and it doesn't have to be anyone else's. I see it all as the eternal now, past, present, future. They run in parallel, and it's just a question of frequency, resonance, as Tesla would have called it, to reaccess one or more timelines, the past, present, etc., etc. And I think that these beings, some of them, I'm satisfied, have a time travel capability, and they also have the means to go to other dimensions, other alternate realities, even. So they're not only interested in us in a genetic profile sense, but it's what Ed Casey would have called, the soul entity. They're interested in us in many cases with who we were in past incarnations, clear back, I believe, to when some of us were active participants in, say, the Orion Wars, when we, for all intents and purposes, we would have been considered aliens. From our Earth-based perspective, some of our past parallel incarnations, we would have been aliens. And somehow, some way, these beings seem to know that about us. They seem to know, like, what star systems we hailed from, what civilizations we came from. And that's the tragedy, really, of the mind swipe reincarnational cycle, because we should be able to summon these memories. We should be able to have that level of recall, but we don't, right? So it's back to the babe in the woods syndrome again. When we come into this reality kicking and screaming, we got to start over essentially. But you know what? It's like we just got to get on with it, right? And very quickly about and also about my physical DNA profile. It goes back to ancient China. I'm convinced the dragon courts of this is long before what we call Imperial China. They had their golden age as well. I mean, think in Atlantean times, and also some of my bloodline goes back to Portugal and Spain, the Iberian Peninsula, and a lot of it is Filipino in the middle. So I definitely believe that there's a component to this. The deep black military, because they have access, particularly to the medical records of military dependents, children of military people, they would know all about them as far as their blood types, as far as their DNA, junk DNA, and otherwise, right? They have a very good idea of not only the military personnel in their ranks, of who's an abductee and likely who they're getting abducted by, or which groups, but also their dependents, their children. They would have a very good read into and I fall into that category because I was a Navy brat. And very quickly about the second question, I think that the mantis beings are major players. I'm not saying this um, as a negative thing towards your friend. It's just an observation. It's just that sometimes these mantis beings, they're quite adept at love bombing people. They're quite adept at overwhelming percipients, abductees, with this sense of like their total omniscience. Like they're just so full of wisdom. They're so full of love. It comes across sometimes to the abductees almost in a love drug fashion, where they're just utterly captivated. And I mean, the feeling should be incongruous with what they're seeing, because what they're looking at is a big 7 foot tall or
Yeah,
higher
let me clarify
upright
real quick that because
upright mantis being.
he definitely wasn't love bombed. He said that the
Oh, okay, good.
relationship that he has with them is a coarse one in the sense that he gets tired of seeing them. He got to the point where he was saying that he didn't want to interact with them until he saw their true form.
Uh
Because
huh.
they would have come to him blurry
Oh
as
yeah.
different things. That he couldn't really see what they looked like. And to one time he pushed back and said, "Look, I'm tired of this shit. Show me what you really look like, or we're not doing this anymore." And they said, "All right, well, we're going to show you, but you're going to be scared." So 7 foot mantis being pops up in his bedroom, scared the
Telling you.
shit out of him. So that's pretty much how it went down with them. And
Well, you know what? He had the absolutely right attitude about the whole thing. It's like, hey, look, throw me a bone. At least let me know what you look like, because this is not a fair interchange that we're going through. So kudos to him. Yeah, I didn't mean to imply that he was taken under the love bomb spell, but they do that to a lot of people. But and it works. There's a lot of people going out there singing the praises of the mantis beings as being these highly spiritually evolved beings. But as we know from Ted Rice and others, they're part of the human consumption game, and also they are key players in what I feel is a soul reincarnation kind of matrix trap that they've set up. I've had very gifted world class psychics that I work with, and they've seen with their etheric third eye vision these mantis beings in other dimensions, and they've created these devices that appear to the psychic as like these hoses or tendrils going down into our reality and just kind of connecting with it, plugging into it, harvesting loosh, I don't know, right? But somehow plugging into this reality, and by extension, the entire biosphere, if one looks at it that way. But anyhow, I'd be interested in hearing Tom's thoughts on this. Thank you for asking those questions, by the way.
Yeah, those are some good questions. Kind of bouncing off of what James said. If you're going to believe in the sheer possibility of time travel, then you also have to admit that, okay, well, if the future is relatively open, then it's not just time travel, it's also a time war between competing probable futures. So that's point number one. Point number two is that if you then also believe in reincarnation, then it's not just about our past lives, but also about our future lives. So putting all that together, it's theoretically possible that some of these abductors, I'm not saying I believe this 100%, but I'm saying it's possible that some of these abductors could be potential descendants abducting their own ancestors, perhaps even directly. And the reason why that matters is because how much of a free will violation is it to abduct your own self? Now, personally, of course, there is a free will violation there, but it might not be as severe of a violation as someone you're not even closely related to, right? So it's possible that they're exploiting various loopholes or laws in the greater metaphysical framework to get away with more than they could otherwise. So that's part of it, and also the other part is your own genetics. Like your own genetics determines part of your personality, part of your behavior, and therefore also part of your, I guess, mechanical destiny in a way. Like your probable future trajectory, just based on who you are and what you're capable of. And that in itself probably interacts with this whole time travel stuff, or even just other dimensions, in terms of allowing certain entities to influence certain people more than others. So that's why they might also be more preferential about certain bloodlines that are more open to their influence and also more helpful to their agenda. So as we think about this, it's actually a very complicated system of different loops that go between time, between different levels of reality, and they seem to have a very good command and understanding of that process, and that's why I think so much of the so-called phenomenon is actually a mystery to humanity at large, because we're stuck on this linear time train track with the five senses, and for them to manipulate us, it's almost like fish in a barrel in a way. But luckily, enough people are awakening and looking into these things that it's not a total crapshoot.
Hey, I'm Tom and James. I wanted to know on the aspect of predicting timelines, right? If there's if you are operating from a timeline manipulation and time traveling perspective, you would want to reduce entropy because no matter how sophisticated you are, too much entropy just becomes incalculable. if you have 8 billion people and they're really self-agentic and they can sort of decide, you can't really even narrow down the timelines, even if you could compute all of them. Do you get what I'm saying? You sort of need a personality that's more restricted, that's more narcissistic, more psychopathic. Is that how you're seeing things too? That part of the abuse that happens in some abductions is to narrow and predict the behavior and thereby manipulate timelines more effectively?
Well, I'll just comment on that quickly, and then James can chime in. So typically, when I look at people who get targeted for abductions or entity manipulation or any sort of interference like that, it seems to be that they divide these people into three different categories. One category is that the person is a threat, maybe just based on their dangerous level of curiosity and intelligence and interest in the subject that might uncover some of the more unsavory aspects of it, and that's why certain researchers do get unfortunately taken out through mysterious cancers or induced suicides and so on. We got that. We got the other possibilities that they are useful recruits, right? The people who are groomed from a young age to eventually end up pitching for their respective alien group and being an important mouthpiece for their agenda. And then the third category seems to be more like these people are easily used, easily toyed with, and to be used for sadistic pleasure or food. So, recruit, feed upon, or destroy as a threat. And the threat thing kind of goes back to what James said about the possibility that if reincarnation is real and certain souls have a very off-planetary history, I guess you could say, then certain pre-existing alien agendas that are antagonistic to the current main alien agenda, those people then might be abducted and monitored and programmed to dissuade them from carrying out any latent tendencies towards accomplishing that agenda that might still be active within them. So, yeah, I do think that they look for that component in people and try to massage the timeline and try to eliminate the unpredictable adversarial factors.
And on top of that, where do you see mantids? Because I see them as like, if they're somewhere near the top of the food chain that we can see, what is in it for them in terms of manipulating the trajectory of the soul? Do you have any idea as to why? And same for James.
Okay, well, you can look at it from a practical perspective, like just evolutionary mechanics and survivalism. Just the sheer fact of trying to propagate their intelligence and expand their influence and power and so on. Or you can look at it from a more spiritual perspective, that what we think are ultra-terrestrials are actually more from the darker end of the spiritual spectrum, let's say a demonic flavor, and that in the end, in the ultimate end, their goal is to crush any sort of God spark or higher light that is here. They're essentially trying to declare a war on the infinite loving creator by invading.
A counter force to expansion. You're saying like ultimate contraction, control,
Yeah.
like evil, Manichaean, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly, and then it comes down to more of a spiritual issue than an extraterrestrial issue, where the latter is merely a prop or a fictional narrative to get at what's ultimately an extraterrestrial thing. However, we have some of the more like extreme fundamentalist Christians saying that aliens are entirely demonic and that's all they are. This is a purely spiritual phenomenon, but we know that's not the case because there is biological material and chemical traces and implants retrieved and so on. So there's a biological aspect to it. So if there is a demonic aspect at the very top of that hierarchy, there's a huge series of intermediate levels of biology and genetic engineering and biological vessels and ships and bases and whatever, for it to accomplish that within the physical realm, within, I guess, the fiction of this physical universe. So it's kind of complicated.
Tom, thank you so much, man. And James, I'd love to hear what your perspective is on this stuff.
Yeah, I agree with Tom. I mean, he has a way of being so succinct and concise, right? Which I have a problem with sometimes. So I agree with that. And also, there's this concept which I've talked about for some time, incarnational infiltrations. And we see this, and again, I don't want to upset or offend any people that don't believe in reincarnation. I'm just speaking as a possibility, let's say a hypothesis, working hypothesis. If one looks to their own, in some examples, their own prior incarnations in a linear sense here on Earth, they will find that they were not always these, pleasant, really nice people. There were times when they were invaders. There were times when they were conquerors, and they took part an active role in expanding certain warlike empires and tribes and what have you, all around the world. Now you take the good with the bad with that. I mean, I like to think that I could take certain aspects of that, either consciously remembered or unconsciously remembered, but still from an oversoul perspective, it's still part of my skill set. It's still part of, I don't want to say it defines me, but it helps me to understand things in a way which I can process readily, which I can process easily. Okay, so that's just from an earthly reincarnational standpoint. Let's go further back. Let's say in some of our alien incarnations, we were active participants in one way or the other in the long-standing Orion Wars, where we're actively intriguing, spying, warring against one or more different ET races and civilizations, right? So that really isn't that far removed from if someone was a Mongol or a Viking or a Macedonian in a previous incarnation, bent on conquest, whatever the case may be, right? So, in a very real way, from an oversoul perspective, we are the sum of all of our parts. So we would retain that. It would be in the morphic resonance field, information field that we should supposed to have access to, but which we oftentimes don't. And the incarnational infiltration aspect comes in from the standpoint of, we would all like to think that we're all descended from the Palladians and these friendly, supposedly, ET civilizations, right? But what if some of us at an oversoul level made a decision to incarnate into, say, the Draco civilization or to one of the more regressive Orion civilizations bent on conquest, right? Once infiltrated, once incarnated into that culture, into that civilization, and this ties in directly with what Tom said a moment ago. This makes it that much easier to reincarnate into essentially your own bloodline. So, in our example, if you've successfully incarnated as a Draco or a reptilian, and the best operative is one who doesn't know he's an operative, okay? So he's got that mind swipe going. So he or she, in our example, is going to do everything the Draco civilization does: conquest, slavery, torture, all that stuff, right? Because if they don't carry out those kinds of behaviors, people, their neighbors and their friends are going to look at him. I don't know. There's something wrong about this guy, right? He's not really one of us. So at some level, they have to behave like them, and the best way to behave like them is to be absolutely convinced you are part of that civilization, and it makes it that much easier to reincarnate back into your Draco reptilian bloodline and continue this, excuse me, incarnational infiltration, because it's a great way at a very deep soul level of understanding the order of battle, what makes up their culture, their psychology, a lot about their technical know-how, etc., etc. It gives you a leg up, because later were you to reincarnate back into another ET race that is in opposition, let's say, to the Draco, and I'm just assuming that for some of these more advanced civilizations, they have a way of getting around these memory mind swipes, right? And externally imposed amnesia, and they may be able to reacquire some of the memories, some of the experiences they had as a Draco, as a reptilian, and as a mantis being, whatever the case may be. So I'm just throwing that out there as a possibility, because I'm satisfied with my conversations with a number of people that some of them, when they say that I was I was an active participant in these Orion Wars, and the kind of detail they share, the kind of impressions I'm getting energetically, intuitively, I can't discount what they're saying, right? And I kind of look at what's going on in our planet as an extension of these Orion Wars. And getting back to the point I think you or someone else had made earlier about having all these billions of people on the planet and the potential for entropy to get kind of, go,
For
yeah,
chaos to
chaos,
increase,
right?
the more free will
And
you
and
have.
I'm also of the belief, and I'm satisfied. You look at the gross hypocrisy of how Graham Hancock and others are treated. He came out with the Ancient Apocalypse series on Netflix. Now, here in our normal surface lunacy world, we're being told over and over exhalations and cow farts, and we're destroying the environment. Give up your rights, you lowly carbon-based life form, right? Yet, so they're instilling in us constantly this fear of imminent catastrophe because of what we're doing to the environment. But when someone like Graham Hancock and geologists rock up and say, "Oh well, it's in the geologic record, it's in the fossil record. This planet and presumably the solar system is subject to cyclical celestially driven cataclysms," and they come back every 12,000 years, and it's a series of them. It's not just an overnight thing; it could last for centuries until the Earth settles into its, you know, axis and settles into its orbit again, and then somehow, some way, the surface and the oceans are repopulated. Go figure with life forms. So this has happened before. This mysterious influx of life forms suddenly, right? So who's to say that we're not on the cusp of another series of celestially driven cataclysms, and the controllers, human hybrid, and otherwise, know this. They know there's going to be, to use a term in common in fashion these days, a big reset here on the surface. So before everyone is wiped out, let's get our money's worth out of them. Let's do all these programs, all these agendas, uh, put as many of our goodies inside these people as possible, because they're all going to die anyway. And the end game, what if the potential of the end game, because what we're hearing from some of these, and I didn't want to delve in these areas, but I think there's a spiritual,
Oh, if they're dark, you need to dive
well,
deeper,
there's a spiritual
please.
component to the whole medical industry in general, but the treatments so called in the recent past. There's definitely a spiritual component to at least some of the ingredients, and some of the German researchers have found this out. And but we've also seen this in pharmaceuticals. I mean, people start taking certain pharmaceuticals. This goes back decades. Then they start seeing entities. They start seeing portals open up in their houses. That's just over the counter or prescription. Pharmaceuticals can do this. Some of them. Never mind what the illicit drugs could do, like crank, meth, speed, et cetera. Really open people up. So the potential exists that not only do they know there's going to be this great reset anyway, so let's call the herd, let's call the surface population, but what if they want more than just that? What if they want something to do with the consciousness, and they somehow have entrapped the consciousness through a variety of means? I would suggest that this latest effort the last few years is just the latest iteration of that. But I believe that this process of soul capturing has been underway for some time. So the very real possibility exists that, I mean, one really shouldn't worry about shedding one's mortal coil, because death is a natural process. It's a transition. However, and this harkens back to what we talked about earlier, the ability to astral abduct by non-human beings, as well as deep black elements of the military, who I'm satisfied what we call the deep black elements of the military have been suborned and are all intents and purposes a part of this Orion Empire, a part of this Draco reptilian mantis empire, right? It's been co-opted essentially. What if the intention is not only to cull the population, but to be able to access all the consciousness, all the souls that they choose to access, and store them somehow, maybe in some kind of cloud, maybe. We know that like warlocks and adepts can
The
do
moon.
this. Or the moon. The moon is a classic example of that. So thank you. I don't know if I answered your question, but I'm just thinking out loud here.
No, you did. No, you did. And thank you so much, James. That was amazing.
Rick, before you call on anybody
Yeah,
else, actually wanted to jump in there with James and
yeah.
Tom. And I just want to float the possibility that some, maybe not all, but at least some of these memories of past lives, the Orion, these planets, different, you're an Octurian, you're born into your starseed family. I just want to float the possibility, and I'd love to hear from Tom and James on this, that some of this is deception. At least some of it is deception. If they can deceive us in our 3D life, they can certainly deceive us in the astral dreamscape and in this area where we think we have lived this life or that life. And that does not, by the way, discount reincarnation. I'm just saying if they're able to deceive us, we have to at least put the net out a little bit more widely and say that they can deceive us in the afterlife as well, in between lives, and possibly, our own memories of these lives.
I absolutely agree, but I'll let Tom deal with that first.
Yeah, I totally agree with that too, and it's a common tactic that you see. I mean, there's a whole subculture of starseeds now on the net, and the thing about a lot of this stuff is that they're half truths, right? So you got the baby and you got the bathwater, and if you accept it, if you accept both of those, then you're going to be wrong, and if you throw out both, you're going to be wrong. So the difficult task of discernment is figuring out, okay, well, which part is true, which part is false, and how is it false? Now, one thing I have seen quite a bit is where a person comes into this life with an innate sense that they're different. Um, their consciousness is different, their preferences, their talents and biases are different from the average, and they don't quite fit in. And so they conclude eventually that, okay, well, maybe I don't really have a human soul. Maybe I'm a foreigner here because I don't really. I mean, everyone perceives me as an alien, and I perceive them as different. So maybe I don't really belong here. But see, the thing is, they don't have a full, clear memory of why that is or who they actually are, but they do have that sense. So then they're very easy pickings for certain alien groups to abduct them, or just entities to manipulate on that, crank away on that leverage, and convince them that they are this particular alien group. Oh, you're actually one of us. You're a gray or a reptilian or whatever. And a lot of times they'll buy into it because it fits their subconscious feeling. But ironically, if some of this stuff is true about ancient, alien wars and bloodlines and stuff, what if they're actually a soul from an enemy alien group, and now they've been convinced to pitch for the wrong team by things that are playing on that? So these are the possibilities that we have to take into account.
I absolutely agree, because what we see is so many people, far more than those who believe that the Orion Wars were real, that they were participants in it, and it was a very hostile, long-term conflict. Contrast with all those who believe, like the warm and fuzzy ET, I'm an Arcturian starseed, and I mean, I've been at conferences where women have walked up to me. I mean, almost archetypal blonde-haired women walk up to me, and the first thing out of their mouth is, I'm a Palladian hybrid starseed walk-in, right? How do I answer that, right? How do I even respond to something like that? So, point being is that, and it goes back to what Tom talked about also about neutralization. You have the people that they regard as potentially hostile. You have the people that they can potentially use, and then you have this other category, right? Well, one way to neutralize a large swath of those who have an awareness of the alien presence on Earth is to make them believe they're starseeds, make them believe that they're part of this ascension process to help spiritually evolve the human race with the help of our ET benefactors. Again, it's an example of giving one's power away. We need aliens to be spiritually evolved, right? I mean, if I snuck into someone's bedroom in the middle of the night, right, and I told them, well, I'm here for your spiritual evolution, they're not going to buy that. They're going to throw things at me, right? They're going to shoot at me. But if I'm an ET, somehow, some way, it's acceptable, it's all justified, and I don't buy that. And I think that that's a very good point you mentioned, Fringe, because, like, for example, today I'm seeing more and more examples of clearly CGI, doctored, clickbait, UFO videos, right? Whereas in the past, and largely sub rosa, because only people with an interest even bothered looking at these videos, there was a whole plethora of what I consider to be valid, 100% hardcore video, daylight and nighttime, of UFOs, right? But now, because we have this bait and switch faux disclosure going on and all this other stuff, they're flooding the internet and the thought bubbles, if you will, with just swarms of these fake videos in order to muddy the waters. And I think that you can draw an exact parallel with all these people. I'm not making a value judgment about them. I'm not castigating them. But you will find a lot more of these people with a new age mentality. That's why Eve Lorgan and I were pariahs in Southern California. We were looked at, oh, Eve Lorgan and Bartley, all they ever talk about are negative abductions, right? So we were ostracized, essentially ostracized. We were, looked down upon, right? I mean, we were a cancel culture before cancel culture. The way they treated me and Evie and Barbie and Candy Turner and others, right? Because they thought we were too negative about this. So we have to guard against this notion that we're somehow spiritually evolved and we're somehow better than the rest, because the ETs told me that. I had an encounter when I was 4 years old, and oh, you're special, you have this destiny to fulfill. Well, how special am I if they tell that to everybody or a lot of other people? I can't be, by definition, I can't be that special if they tell the same message to all these other people, right? So, people have to, retain their humility about all this too, because activated ego is a sure way for someone not only to have entity attachments, but it's a road to being taken up as a host, if you ask me.
Hey guys, I just wanted to say thank you for sharing your perspectives. I'm gonna drop down to listener, but yeah, you fucked me up with the manipulate the timeline to abduct yourself to get around the free will thing. That I'm gonna be mulling over that one for a minute, but appreciate it.
Yeah, well, it's good to see you here, Experience. We love to fuck people up with, especially with timelines. Um, yeah. So everybody, for the order, you guys have all been super patient. We're gonna do Ganga, J Just, Lorray, Parsi, and then UAP Mike. UAP Mike, it's awesome to see you in this space. Thanks for being patient, man. It's just a lot of people queuing up here. Ganga, go ahead, man.
Yes, what James and Tom were talking about deceptions of different kinds. I was thinking while James was talking that he was talking about the genders and identity issues and all that kind of stuff. And the only thing that kept beeping in my mind is uh, technically he's describing an entire landscape of different kinds of deceptions, but basically it seems to stunt uh, the person's ability to discern what is true and what's false. Like, for example, they mess with the identity of the person so that they can cause the person to think, to like open up to new possibilities. But you think that'd be like a positive. Instead, it's like a negative in the way they're doing it. It's like they're confusing their gender. What reason would you have to confuse someone's gender or their identity of their past? It's like giving them these perceptions that they're star seeds or whatever, and in reality, it's just an illusion. Well, in my opinion, it's an illusion. But I was wondering, could he expand a little bit more on that? Is there a purpose to sodomizing someone? In these experiments and these procedures and stuff? Is there a reason why some reptilian creature finds a human being attractive at all in some realistic sense, or is it just sadistic horse games of playing with people's minds and bodies and stuff?
That's a very good question. I'll try to make it short. A lot of these beings, some of the reptilians, not all of them, because there's different species and civilizations of them, some of them view the human race as nothing more than domesticated livestock, essentially. So, and because of their nature, their reptilian, saurian, lizard-like nature, they derive like this perversive, sadistic satisfaction when they're inflicting torture or sexually assaulting somebody, in our example. And you can see this reflected with the hybrid serial murderers, the anger excitation rapist, also known as a sexual sadist. Roy Hazelwood, one of the founders of the FBI Behavioral Sciences Unit, came up with those terms. And to describe a specific type of serial killer who literally gets off, just ecstatic, sexually aroused by inflicting torture on a helpless victim, right? And that is very reptilian, the negative archontic reptilian variety. That's a very reptilian mindset and mentality to derive sexual satisfaction and gratification from doing harm to others. And look how they've managed to imbue these narcissistic behaviors and mentalities starting at an early age now, because they've long had control of the educational slash indoctrinational system. So these people are coming out excreted out of the school systems. They're unable to read, tell the time on a normal clock face. They're unable to, do simple mathematics and arithmetic in their head, right? They're all confused about genders and pronouns, what have you, and that's deliberate, because what they want, if they can't actually turn someone into a useful idiot ally asset, right? Not so much ally, but an asset to go around cancel culture and shouting down people who are wearing a certain kind of hat and what have you. That's the kind of dystopic society they want. This kind of Clockwork Orange kind of bully gang mentality. Now, before it was just like, I wouldn't say just, but there were a great many people that were enduring targeted individual gang stalking kind of stuff. But now, because the schools excrete so many of these foaming at the mouth liberals, progressives, etc., society is inundated with these people. I mean, you can hardly avoid these videos nowadays of like so-called Karens going off and causing a ruckus
James,
because
my
yes,
call monitor is going to come out only because I do want, especially experiencers in the space, to feel like they can come up and speak, and I just want to maybe direct this away from
oh yeah,
specifics and just kind of go into the
okay.
general
Oh, sorry about
way.
that. Yeah,
Oh
sometimes I
no,
can
don't
get
be sorry. Look, you are absolutely entitled to do you. I just, especially for the experiencer spaces, I like to keep them just a little bit more neutral so that we can all feel, that we can
yeah. I got it.
listen. I don't want to, for number one, make anyone feel attacked, but number two, that person's feeling attacked, they're going to shut their ears off and not listen.
Yeah,
And
I
so,
understand entirely. So,
thanks,
yeah,
Jim.
the point I just wanted to make is that they definitely will affect our behaviors because it'll suit their agenda. On the one hand, it neutralizes as a threat to them. On the other hand, they can actually co-opt a great many people to turn this into kind of a dystopic, Luciferian kind of society, which is what they want essentially. So I don't know if I answered your question, but it definitely has something to do with behavior modification and all that.
Kanga, do you have a follow up?
Yes. Does he feel that do you or Tom feel that their attempts to also in New Age type of thinking that there is no single truth, that it's all very nebulous and you can pick your own truth? Do you think that's also a part of their game?
Yes, we see a surface level variant of that, the cultural relativism, right? That's promoted by the CIA and all their think tanks. So we see a similar thing in a new age where, on the one hand, they absolutely reject anything of a negative, that has a negative connotation to it, and they embrace everything that has to do with like spiritual involvement, ascension, what have you, to the exclusion of anything else. And but there's some built-in inconsistencies and incongruencies within that because when you call these New Agers out on some of their beliefs, the claws come out. A moment ago they were all love and light, now they're ready to do battle. So obviously they're triggered, right? And the triggering can take many forms. People can fall asleep. People can get agitated. People want to get up and smoke a cigarette. There's different ways people, or like I said, falling asleep is a very common one, right? Which bespeaks a level of control where they can mute someone's consciousness to the extent where they fall asleep during a lecture or something like that. That's pretty powerful stuff, and I felt that. I felt that before watching certain documentaries, the Taken series that Steven Spielberg came out with. I couldn't even stay awake for a lot of those episodes. So I know how the feeling is of how your consciousness can be muted and can be manipulated. So, when I say that about the New Age crowd, I'm not being critical of them. I have empathy and compassion for them as fellow humans, but definitely, in my view, they've been co-opted to create this kind of counterpoint to lead people away from the truth and get everyone thinking that all this has to do with spiritual evolution and ascension and what have you. When it's not, it's all of it. It's a lot of it is the opposite of that.
Yeah, I mean that's totally correct in my opinion, and it doesn't matter whether it's the New Age or like the Middle Ages with the church structure or ancient times in Egypt or Greece. It doesn't matter what the culture is. Each one of those has certain psychological exploits that can be leveraged, right? So in past times, it might have been don't question authority because authority is a representation of God, and if you go against the church, then you're going against God. So just have faith and don't question, don't ask questions. And then nowadays, well, I mean, religion doesn't have the grip that it used to have. And, secularism was the main thing for a while. And so that's why nowadays we've got pseudo skeptics that bash ufology, that try to suppress the truth, that help the government suppress the truth. and because that appeals to the whole logical mindset of the modern times. And then on the other hand, you also got the modern version of religious beliefs, which is like the New Age is a good example. And as you just said, James, there are so many different ways that those things can also be exploited, right? So typically, it's all sales tactics, cult tactics, propaganda, whatever exploits the back doors in human psychology. That's what's being used.
Yes, and notice the parallel between dogmatic fundamentalist religion and the New Age. They have taboos, they have dogmas, they have people that are regarded as like the elders or whatever in the field, whose word is gospel, if you will. So there are parallels between the New Age and religious dogmatic fundamentalism. Really, they're two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, and science is no exception to that either, right? Because we don't just have science nowadays; we have scientism, which is like the priesthood of science, which is filled with academic inertia and the priests with a PhD who determine what consensus reality ultimately is. So it seems like nothing is ultimately safe, other than really digging down and just being logical and discerning and honing your intuition on all of this.
Jay, just go ahead.
Okay, I have questions about physical evidence. Has anyone, come back after an abduction, like a researcher, and physically scan that person for DNA that can prove that there's some foreign DNA on them? Because obviously, if they're being abducted, there's some sort of biological, I don't know, something left over on them if they're being touched by these beings. Also, are there other physical, uh, is there other physical evidence that happens in these abductions? And has anyone brought back something from a ship, like an instrument or, just some sort of souvenir that can be examined?
Go ahead, Tom.
James,
I
Tom?
can answer. I'll go after.
Oh no, actually, yeah. Well, I don't have much to say on this, just because I've known a lot of people sort of informally, rather than being out there visiting people and taking evidence to labs, because that takes a lot of money. But I do know people who have had a lot of residues, and there's also famous cases like the Peter Curry case, where he supposedly got some alien hair that it was genetically analyzed, and interestingly enough, the shaft of the hair and the root of the hair had different DNAs in them. So it's almost like whatever the being was that interacted with him was a genetic chimera. All right, so a chimera just meaning you just smash two sets of DNAs together, and then one of them was this weird rare strain of some sort of Asian DNA from Northeast China, and the other one was like a Basque Celtic DNA, which is interesting because goes back to the topic earlier about bloodlines and what sort of genetics different alien factions are into. So that's one famous case, but I know there's others like Daryl Sims. He's extracted, and who's the other guy? I forget. But there are people that had extracted implants supposedly and analyzed them under electron microscopes and found some very interesting anomalies.
What about
Tom.
physical, like
Oh,
body, and on the ground as well? Let's say, craft that lands in the backyard, so they'd have physical evidence of that. Also, I have one more question before you move on. Um, Last night I was in space. Jack Sarfati said something like very offhanded, like he just said it matter of factly. Oh yeah, we were CRISPRed from apes to what we are now, basically, he said. So I found that interesting. Do you think we're manufactured beings? And do you think, like, after you were talking about, after like 12,000 years, something happens to the earth and we start over, do you think that they reseed the earth every time?
I
Go
can
ahead,
answer
James.
part of that. The the thing about the evidence is there have been times when a woman has passed when she was urinating or doing something else. A what amounts to an alien hybrid fetus embryo has come out. Uh, Either that she was inseminated some way, artificially or otherwise, and this thing grew inside of her, and then at some point it came out. But in short order, what often happens is it'll just mysteriously disappear. And we've had similar accounts where somebody would like sneeze and blow an implant out of their nose, and they would store it in a glass vial or something, and then it mysteriously disappears. Now, Leah Haley, an old friend of mine, she had scraped out from the roof of her mouth some kind of square-shaped little, I don't know, computer wafer or something. Now, I'm not saying ETs put it there. Military could have put it there because she had both ETs and military experiences. But I think what happened, if memory serves, was she sent that implant or whatever it was that came from the roof of her mouth to some investigator somewhere, and the thing just disappeared. So we have lots of stories like that where people have some artifact, but it just mysteriously disappears. This will even happen in people's cell phones, in their libraries, in their photo libraries, where either mysterious images will show up, they have no recollection of taking the photo, or conversely, they'll have some quite extraordinary photograph in their phone library, and it'll just mysteriously disappear. So those things. I've known of cases where people were sending uh, photos, and in the process of sending the photos, they just disappeared. So the recipient didn't receive it, and the person sending the photo, they no longer had it. So it kind of bespeaks this idea that whoever these beings are, whatever they are, they have the means to, make things disappear right out of your phones or your computers or your laptops. I know that Daryl Sims had installed a post-hypnotic suggestion into one of the abductees he was working for this gal to retrieve some kind of evidence. Get this, you probably heard the story, but it's interesting. Uh, this gal was abducted. The aliens were in her bedroom, and the post-hypnotic suggestion kicked in from Daryl. So she came to an awareness, so I need to bring back evidence. She reaches up and she plucks one of the eyepieces off the alien's face. Beneath it, for this kind of ET, there was some kind of weird kind of red light kind of thing, where the eyeball, the iris should have been. So it kind of reminds me of those Cylons in the original Battlestar Galactica that had a weird kind of light thing going on, and it would pass for their eyes. And like the other stories, the gal tried to hang on to the eyepiece, but it mysteriously disappeared. So they must have like teleported away or come back for it or something. So, but there have been many cases of soil samples taken, and the after effects of foliage and grass. Crop circles are a classic example of that. But there's differences to the soil too. The soil a lot of times is unable to absorb or retain water, right? So you have a weird anomalies or things with the seeds of like crops that have been affected by the landings or the close proximity of these craft, where things start happening to the seeds, nodules. They start growing, sprouts in weird angles and directions and what have you. So there are after effects on vegetation, soil, what have you. That's well documented in our field.
Jay, if that is satisfactory for you, I'm going to read an audience question, and then Ulrich, I think you remember the hands.
Yes, I do remember the hands.
Here's a question from the Purple Pill. Why does the phenomenon only seem to affect the Anglo world? And I also find it very interesting that, James, we actually share some genetics off of something that you said earlier.
Oh,
So,
really? Okay.
yeah, which is so weird. It's not, when you really look long term, did we all come from a certain set of, 3,000 people or 2 people, whatever it is. But it is interesting how abductees do tend to share certain genetics. Which one of you wants to speak to that? Because we know it doesn't just affect the Anglo world, but there does seem to be a genetic component.
Yeah, well, Tom, if you'd like to go ahead.
Fringe, I love the question too, because as a black person, like it does seem like mostly only white people get abducted. You know what I mean? So I just wanted to say, like, I appreciate the question.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a
it
complex and
is.
touchy subject, but you go ahead.
Well, yeah. Well,
Yeah,
the
you go
fact
ahead.
that the gentleman just spoke is black. Tom is, is not entirely of Anglo descent, and I'm not. So right there, you have an example of
And
three people.
neither am I.
Yeah, three, four people. So, and then also, if you look at the accounts from Japan, Amaterasu, the sun goddess, et cetera, and then you look at people like Credo Mutwa in South Africa, and also, the Mayan or the Mesoamerican, Central American uh, stories about these things. So clearly, it's a global phenomenon that impacts people all over the world. I think maybe it's because of publishing or media or whatever the case may be. We seem to hear more stories in the Anglo West, but I'm satisfied that Native peoples all over the world have had their issues with this.
Yeah, I think if you were to really, really, really drill down on it genetically through some sort of intense genetic analysis of all of it, then maybe you would find that, oh, okay, what all these people of all these different ethnicities have in common is that perhaps ancient times it traces to this group of people or that particular bloodline or whatever, right? So the fact is we don't 100% know, and when we talk about, oh, only the Anglo-Saxon people, we're going based on visual morphology based on actual deep genetic analysis. So we might look different, but we might still have something genetically in common at a deep level that we just don't know until we really do that analysis.
Can we go into really uncomfortable terrain? And like, I love what you said, Tom. You're basically saying there might be genetic markers, right? That if you keep them, what's the term? Not inbred, but like if you keep them more in the same, if you keep the same populations, right, then obviously the amount of melanin, the race is going to look more homogenous. But there does seem to be perhaps even like a cultural co-opting of race, like like racism or race or eugenics and sex are inseparable from both the taboo world, everything from World War II and beyond in wars, and ufology, right? Like, how is race maybe being co-opted? Like, even if we have to look back and it turns out that Hitler met some Nordics and was convinced that the Nordic ideal was part of the Aryan and the Nazi thing. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, what are your thoughts on like human psychology and our understanding of race? When I listen to, what's the guy's name, the black guy, some Billy Carson, right? He thinks that we might have been branded and we might represent like different Anunnaki, just to keep track of who's who. Do you mind just talking about the stuff that nobody is comfortable talking about?
I'll comment a bit, and then James can comment too if you want. So basically, human origins is such a big mystery that's wrapped up also in political controversy. There are so many vested interests in keeping the origins of humans secret. Both political and I mean, there's even economic reasons for it, and so on. Um, and if you really dig into that, basically what you'll find is that the different human races, it doesn't seem natural to me. Like, it's all blamed on just selective evolutionary pressures and so on. But it seems to me that some of it seems to be artificially engineered. And if it is tweaked or modified in some way by some non-human group, then that group, if they're still around today, would probably have a reason for abducting those people more than others, because maybe it's more in line with their agenda. Or, conversely, maybe you have different races who have different genetic tool sets statistically on average. Maybe some have more of this quality than another. Maybe some are more psychic than others, or more aloof, or more easily dissociated through trauma. That's sort of a pattern that comes up in ufology too, in abduction research, where yeah, perhaps some abductees, especially in the MyLabs field, they got a certain quality where they are more easily dissociated and split into different multiple personalities. So I think that's part of it. Ultimately, it just comes down to how useful a particular person's genetic toolset is to a particular alien agenda. And I suppose that if an agenda is looking for certain things, then you will find that more in certain bloodlines or even races than others. But that doesn't mean that everyone who isn't of that race is excluded from being abducted by it. But I would like to bring up an even bigger question, which is, well, instead of just looking at the abductees, how about looking at these aliens themselves, especially the humanoid ones? Why is it that they look mostly a certain way and not another way? And that's sort of an open question.
And so you agree that this utility, it might be certain psychic abilities or psychic affinities, or it might also just be optically, cosmetically beneficial to co-opt the meme, the mimetic meme of any kind of racial supremacy. Am I understanding you correctly, Tom?
Well, there's also a strategic value to it in that if a particular alien faction has chosen to have a humanoid form that is of a particular type, let's say the Nordic physiology or just a more Caucasian looking thing, then for them, if they want to have sympathetic humans on the ground, abductees and contactees who have been groomed, it's very easy to convince them that they are part of that if they look like that, you see. So I think that might kind of go back to what James said about certain types coming up to him and saying, "Oh, I'm this or that starseed." Well, they probably think that because they already look like the meme of what that should look like. So they're easier to fool. And yeah, so I think that's part of it, definitely.
It's interesting, the Caucasian Nordic Palladian appearance. It's woven like a tapestry throughout human history. The They've done DNA tests on some of the mummies from the pharaonic dynasties of ancient Egypt, and they found that a significant number of them had like type A blood, that they were what we would consider to be Scandinavian appearance, blonde hair. Some of the mummies are so well preserved, you could still see blonde eyelashes on some of them. So, you know, blonde haired, blue eyed, and which reminds me of certain ET races, right? Nordics, Palladians, what have you. And they also have these beings in general, because of the ability to create illusions, the ability to shapeshift in some cases, they do seem to take on an appearance comfortable or familiar to the locals of a given region. For example, they, like Amaterasu, appeared as a Japanese looking person to the, I don't know if they called themselves Japan at the time, but in ancient times, it was feudal society. Nevertheless, they were what we would call Japanese. So it's no surprise that when Amaterasu rocks up, the being looks Japanese. And I'm sure something similar happens in other parts of the world where the beings can assume the guise or an appearance that is comfortable or recognizable to the locals, especially if there was an agenda afoot to indoctrinate them with some kind of spiritual beliefs. I do think that humanity over time, over the ages, has consciously or subconsciously adopted some of the virtues, apparent perceived virtues, appearances, dress even, of some of these non-human beings. I mean, to this day, we get reports of beings that are wearing togas or, dressed more like, looking like a Roman senator or something, right? Uh, so, is it any surprise that a lot of societies adopted, the mannerisms and the behaviors and the apparel of the gods, if you will, what they perceive to be gods. So we have that element too, that the syndrome seems to assume a guise and an appearance comfortable to the locals of a given area, in a given culture, in a given time.
Thanks, James. Tom, did you have anything else for that? Or Ulrich, were you going to follow up?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I have to unlock my phone since Face ID got broken. With my fingers. James, can you just, and if you don't, I want to know, does being an African American, whether you have that as a conscious, ever present identity or not, like, what are your thoughts on just being black in ufology? Just anything.
Well,
Yeah, what are
there
you
were some
feeling? Sure.
great researchers. I think his name was Richard Neal. He was a OBGYN consultant to MUFON. and he'd been hot on the trail for what he called the missing twin syndrome, because it seemed to him, as a OBGYN gynecologist, that there were times he would take a baby out of a mother's womb, uh, giving birth, and there seemed to be an extra placenta, right? It's like somewhere along the line, the other baby, the other twin, disappeared, right? And he probably, my guess is he probably kept some of the placental material, etc. And he was making discreet inquiries about this. He was contacting other OBGYNs. Well, he was yet another example of someone who died of a fast acting cancer. See Congressman Stephen Schiff of New Mexico, right? And Richard Neal was a black man. And of course, Barney Hill, great case. I met this one individual. He was an ex Air Force guy. He was stationed at Beale Air Force Base near Sacramento. They used to have the SR 71 there. And he talked about his experiences. Uh, and he had us all laughing because he said, uh, in one of his experiences, he woke up and the crown of his penis had been surgically altered, right? And the way he explained it to his wife and his doctor was like, look, I couldn't have done this. You know what I mean? And he had us all laughing about it, but there's no laughing matter, right? To have something like that done to such a personal, private part of one's anatomy. But over time, there have been some really good African American researchers. But we don't hear as much. I think that African Americans, but also Asian Americans, present company excluded, we're kind of underrepresented in all this, in the greater generic surface level truth community, but especially in the alien abduction UFO field. There's just not many of us. Okay, so it would be nice. I would like to see more in the mix, because they would bring in hopefully some cultural perspectives, especially if they're from the old country, right? But we just don't really have that many. I don't know why that is. Of course, Credo Mutwa. That was an epical series of interviews that David Icke did with Credo Mutwa that really uh, added more clarity to the situation from a shamanistic Zulu perspective.
Uh, James, the reason I'm asking this question, I grew up in Germany. I grew up as an Oreo. I was born in Scottsdale, Arizona, maybe one of the whitest places on earth. Then I grew up in Germany, maybe one of the whitest cultures on earth. Germans have a lot of positive and negative qualities about them. Same thing for Americans, same thing for African Americans. But Germans have this rigid sort of like, if I can't stick it in a box, it doesn't exist. And Americans tend to be a bit more, they make the mistake of mistaking one thing for something that it isn't, right? And I'm saying like America is the place where a cell phone can, for a moment, can look like a gun. You might be more likely to shoot the black guy. Germany's the place where all these people are being shipped off on trains. They never come back. And you're like, well, I'm sure the Holocaust isn't happening. Right now, where I am with my family, on the black side of my family, if I they're pretty much all excommunicated or all estranged from me. But if they also find out that I'm a knower of the phenomenon, it's going to be like, oh, of course, Ulrich, like he believes in aliens, and so I've no idea what the general status is of ufology and the African American community. My sense is, and my sense could be wrong, um, that they might not handle, on average, disclosure as well as some other communities. Do you think there's something inimical to the paranormal or about ufology? And this is a broad generalization, and it's a dangerous question. Feel free not to answer it, but I want to ask the dangerous questions. Like, do you have a similar sense?
Well, one of my friends who since passed away, Bob Urey, he was African American, and he put together a yearly conference in Philadelphia or New Jersey, which I attended. And in fact, I gave a memorial presentation about Dr. Carla Turner at that lecture. And but he had a number of fellow African Americans on his team. Like I said, Bob has since passed away some time now. I don't know if there was anyone that picked up, the torch and carried it forward. Um, I don't think so, which was unfortunate because he had a really good team of researchers. They not only for familiar with, the surface level uh, conspiracy, but the planetary cosmic conspiracy. They had a very good understanding as well. Bob did great work, and unfortunately, like I said, he's not around anymore. Um, and I did meet at that Philadelphia conference a black gentleman who was in the military intelligence community back in the day in Fort Howard, uh, Panama. I think it's Fort Howard, Howard Air Force Base. I can't remember which, but in Panama, he was part of a team in the 1960s, late 1960s, that went down there to retrieve what we now know to be a chupacabra. And he was telling the story to Bill Holden and a few other people. There was a number of ex-military whistleblowers that I'd managed to. I didn't know him, but I'd known some others like William Holden that I'd arranged to be on that lecture, right, at that conference. So it was very interesting listening to this gentleman's story about flying in at night. He was with a, covert operations unit. They retrieved the chupacabra, brought it back to America, and he was there to tell his story. But that story's been lost in the shuffle. I haven't heard from the guy since, and I can't even remember his name. But to answer your question, there's just I think that it could be challenging if someone doesn't have a strong spiritual foundation. This could be a very confronting scenario because we've been told so long that we're at the top of the heap. Then to find ourselves that we may not be at the top of the heap. This is the outcome of the Brookings Institution report that the sudden revelation of the alien presence could undermine everything, religion, economics, what have you. So, and I think that every demographic, every ethnicity is going to have to come to grips with this, and the African American community also. But if they can go back and look at their own history and study like Credo Mutwa's work and what have you, it may not be as frightening, but I think that we will find that resistance in all demographics, all ethnicities. There will be an element that just absolutely refuses to, take the subject seriously, and when it's put in their face, they're going to have problems dealing with it. I think, unfortunately. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did, and I wanted to give you the freedom to go as deep or not as you like. It was quite a provocative question. You guys, I'm gonna Randy and Ganga, I'm gonna prioritize new speakers, and then I'll get to you. So we're gonna go Lorray, Parsi, Charlie HP, and then I am Benedict, Godhead, and then we'll get to Randy and
And real
Ganga.
quick,
Please keep your hands up if you
Rick,
have.
thank you so much for keeping track of that. James, how are we on time? And I also want to point out Astral Space is starting, I think, in about 10 minutes. We don't want to go too far over into that space. It's
Yeah,
Mythic
yeah.
Twitter Week.
I
Yeah.
have to boogie pretty soon, actually.
Okay.
And I'm starting to run out of my charge. But thank you. I know I got long winded on some of the responses, and I do apologize for that.
Don't
And
apologize, James. Let's get to Parsi. I know he's going to want to, comment on some of
And
this.
I need to point out Lorray has
And
been
Lorray.
waiting
Let's
just
get
a
to
little
Parsi
bit
and Lorray
longer.
at least. James, if you're okay with that.
yeah, fine. And I'll really keep the answers short and sweet.
Hello, James. At long last, we
Hi,
meet.
how are you?
Um, well, I'm really good. I'm really good. I have to say, I get lost in these spaces because there's so many things that I just don't have a clue about. But first of all, I want to say I am thrilled to see somebody picking up the reins after Barbara and Carla. Barbara, I tell you, she was the best in my view. She was the absolute best. Um, I want to know, has anyone learned her regression techniques? That's number one. And number two, really quickly, I just want to confirm a lot of the stuff about our having had lives in other worlds, especially those of us that are drawn to this subject, at least according to Marshall Summers' work, which is quite detailed and talks about so much of what you guys are going into. And that if we're drawn to this subject, we probably had lives in other worlds and came here to assist humanity at this time, especially those of us that have sort of never felt human. But back to Barbara, I love how you get into the really nitty gritty, difficult aspects of this. You're talking about how they're able to manipulate people's minds, the new age stuff, which I refer to as the pacification program, to switch us spiritually to be more compliant to their programs and how they want society to go, which I think is related to the hybrid program. But has anybody else learned Barbara's techniques? Is there any way that somebody can learn them? And I was really impressed with what you said about how hypnotists get taken in, because I go to countless UFO conferences here in the UK, and I run across these hypnotists, and they're talking about, oh, my client was on a conveyor belt, but no, there's nothing to be concerned about. And how they get taken in as well. So I'll let you comment on that, and I'll shut up.
Yeah, the Barber was taught by a world-class hypnotherapist, actually a Navy guy, if memory serves, and a former Navy guy. And I don't think that she ever passed that technique on to anyone else. So I think it kind of ended with Barbie. And as far as the other point you made, just refresh my memory about that second point.
About the reincarnation?
Oh, yes. I do believe there's an element. I don't think this is just wishful thinking on my part or me trying to
No, it
cram a
isn't.
square peg into a round hole, but I do believe that there is something to this notion of being boots on the ground, because if you look at the traditions of the Aborigines in Australia, and just about every tribe here, nation, say they're originally from the Pleiades, and then you talk to like the Lakota, for example, they say their origins are from Sirius, and the Anasazi and other tribes in the Southwest. They have an affinity for Orion. A lot of their villages and their habitations are oriented in a pattern very similar to the pyramids and the Giza Plateau, i.e., it emulates it symbolizes the Orion constellation on the ground. So clearly, there are elders and ancient astronomer priesthoods, etc., that have an understanding or a belief that they are have been transplanted here, descended from colonists, whatever the case may be, but they originally didn't come here. So I think that there's a basis for this notion that of boots on the ground, of being here, and that we still have the connection with these different ET groups, good and bad, right?
Yeah, well, the other thing I wanted to mention. Oh God, it just left naturally. Um, what you said about spirituality, and we have this innate ability, but we haven't been able to access it. Marshall Summers' work goes into that as well. It's something I practice, actually. It's a means of our getting into that part of us that is still connected to the divine, that can't be fooled, that develops tremendous discernment, probably remembers past lives, and all sorts of things. Obviously, we've got to get through the chaos of our personal minds, but that is now in the world to help humanity deal with the ET invasion, and they're trying to take they want to colonize us, basically, is my understanding. But I do want people to know that spiritual practice, that's the only thing about us they cannot manipulate, and they know it, and that's why they put the new age stuff out, to weaken people, to tell them they're star seeds, to get them on board to their side, because it deliberately makes them weaker. They know that spiritually oriented people can't be fooled, right? When a real spirituality, they can't fool. They know that, and so this is why I think they go down the love and light and the ascension, that sort of thing. So I just wanted to confirm that there is a spiritual practice in the world that will protect you and give you the discernment and bring back those memories. and those abilities that are innate within us that we've simply forgotten how to do. So I wanted to say that, and I wanted to thank you for bringing that up and recognizing that. I think that is going to be humanity's greatest power in dealing with these beings, seeing the truth of who and what they are. I think your work is absolutely incredible. We need more people that are really talking up how dangerous they are. So I cannot thank you and Tom and Fringe and everybody else and that everybody that sees this for what it is instead of painting this as some great event. This is a huge threshold for humanity to cross through. That we're not alone in the universe, and we are ill prepared to deal. But we have been given tremendous assistance, and there's tremendous information in Marshall's work that goes into what we can do, how we can do it, and what humanity's going to have to do so we can evolve to be who and what we really are as a race. We have got so much potential, and these guys are holding us back horrendously, and they're making the world a darker place. And they're wanting us to blame leaders and all the people that I know are guilty of all kinds of things. But I just can't see us give up on the human family. So I can't thank you all enough for having the space and doing what you do, because God, you guys work hard at this. So anyway, I'll be quiet now, but thank you, James.
Yeah, thank you so much. You know what? I really do got to leave. We can do this again some other time. And I'm disappointed that I'm not able to talk to some of your uh, uh, our friends that are asking to you know have questions. But I really got a boogie. But let's catch up some other time. And I really enjoyed my time. Thank you for having me on here. It's really been a pleasure. It's been quite an honor as well.
James, thank you so much. We hope to have you back again. I'll leave this space open for just a few minutes in case these questions might be generic, but we also want to be respectful of astral space. It's UFO Twitter week. Normally we would just keep going forever, but we don't want to do that today. James, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you, James. Really, man.
Take
If
care.
anyone has questions that I can answer, Ulrich, Tom, anybody up here still wants to keep their hand raised or just tell a quick story, that's great. If you missed James, I'm sorry, but we'll get him back.
Hey Fringe, it's Parsi. I got to run as well, but I just want to put in my 2 cents with what James was saying about the wars that are happening, the Orion Wars. Yesterday on Sephardi's chat, remember how I asked him what the orbs are? And he said the orbs are a different species of NHI that are fighting a war. That's exactly what I saw in my regression with Mary Rodwell. That the orbs are a form of avian NHI, and they're fighting a battle against the reptilian and gray agenda. So him saying that really kind of blew me out of the water. And he's asked me to reach out to him now so he can sort of look into my case. Pretty crazy
Yeah,
stuff.
that was super interesting, Parsi. I did hear that. I thought that was super interesting. Let me know. Let us know. Report back if you can on what he has to say
I
about
will.
that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm sorry you missed James, Betsy. Sorry about
Parsi,
that.
I have a really quick question. Parsi, are you still
Yeah,
there?
yeah.
Um, what's your feeling, or from your regression, from what you parsed from Sarfati, that these orbs, benevolent, malevolent, in between, are they linked to the thermospheric plasma up top that's chasing other plasma?
Yeah, so these orbs only started appearing after my first regression. So my first regression, I found out my past life as a draconian. I really wanted to get rid of that reptilian attachment, so I started doing these Joe Dispenza's Walk for the World meditations. And the byproduct of that was all these orbs started showing up strictly from Orion's belt, that constellation region, and nowhere else. That's where it started. And then I was really curious. I'm like, what are these things? So I did this regression with Mary Rodwell. In that regression, I'm shown that so basically it starts off with me being in a grassy field with a mantid being, which is really old. I'm asking the mantid what I'm doing here. He puts one of his hands on my heart, the other hand he points to Orion's belt, and from there, one of these orbs descends towards the earth. The orb shapes morphs into a golden triangular craft, and I've put the AI representation of that in the thread. The golden craft comes down out of the golden craft come out these three avian beings. So the way that I can describe them is they have owl heads, but bodies of men. They're dressed in golden armor. They take me inside the craft and they fly me off planet into what looks like the sun. So it's like a big orange orb that we fly into. And I'm asking them, where are you taking me? And they end up telling me that we are at the all, spelt ALL. And I'm like, what do you mean by the all? And they say all is what you consider to be in your language God consciousness or the supreme consciousness. And I'm like, why are we here? And I was told that apparently in this incarnation, I'm part of this avian race. And they've been watching over me in this lifetime, basically. And the message that I have to bring to humanity is to make people aware, and as crazy as this sounds, is that they're fighting a war in the astral realm against the reptilian and gray hybridization agenda. And I asked them to elaborate, what is the agenda? And they said that the agenda was the Greys and the reptilians can't live on this 3D plane on Earth by themselves. So they create these hybrid bodies up in their spaceships. Now, you can't just have an empty shell trying to integrate on Earth. So what they need is souls. So they abduct people, they take part of their souls or their entire souls, put them in these hybrids, put the hybrids down on Earth, and that's how the whole mechanism works. Now, the avians are actually trying to stop that whole process from happening, the soul scalping, fractalization of souls. And I asked them, so what do you call yourselves? And they said they are the guardians of souls, the keepers of souls. And that was the information that I got from my regression. It was pretty powerful stuff. Now, I reached out to Ted Rice about this. Ted said, be careful. It could be reptilians masquerading as the good guys trying to give you this information. But then when Jack Sephardi spoke about this yesterday so casually, he said, "Oh yeah, the orbs are just basically another form of NHI, and they're in a war currently with the undersea NHIs. Undersea NHIs mainly are the Greys." That really blew my mind, and it kind of ties in also with the surveillance that I'm going through. So I've got photographs of two orbs. One looks like literally like the face of a gray alien, and the other orb is an orange orb with the actual face of a gray alien in it. And I've got all this evidence. I know that someone else was asking about evidence earlier for people that were abducted. I have no memories of abductions, but I have this evidence of these visits from these beings, whoever they are, whatever they are. And I'm also getting massive amounts of surveillance. Like I've got black helicopters going over my place. They're not even ashamed of doing it. They'll just hover around and I'll take pictures of them. And I mean, I've never seen helicopters like that in my life. And this is Melbourne, Australia. You don't see unmarked black helicopters ever.
Yeah, thank you so much, Parsi. And later, when we have more time, you'll get a chance to go deeper
Yeah,
into it.
sorry, I'll let other people speak. Thank you.
No, I know you waited a long time though, man. So thank you so
And
much.
thank you, James.
And what do you want to do, Fringe? Do we want to call it quits after these three hands?
Yeah, I just want to wrap it up. We want to be respectful of astral space. This is UFO Twitter week. And, a lot of times we'll hang out and just chit chat, even with 5 people in the room. But we want to make sure to all head over to astral space as soon as we close down, please.
Yeah. Do you want to take these 3, or do you want to wrap it up now?
Yeah, if they can commit to being fairly quick.
Yeah. Let's go, Chris, Charlie, Ganga. Chris, go ahead.
Hey, thanks for hosting, Fringe and Ulrich. You guys are doing a great job, and this whole week has been great. I think UFO Twitter week gets better and better. I think every time. So, thank you for doing that. I had a question for actually what's his name? He was just in there and he left. I forgot his name, but so I don't know if anybody can answer, but he was talking about how I don't know if he believes or if he thinks, because I came in a little late, that the black forces or dark government, whatever, is actually doing remote like abductions. So I don't know if anybody can answer, but how does he know that like that's like a thing? Like, because in my experience, I actually think I might have been abducted by like my mind was abducted remotely by government, because I never saw any aliens. So I'm just curious to know, like, how does he know that like that's a thing? I don't know if anybody can answer that, but
Yeah,
thank you.
thanks, Chris. Tom, would you be able to just address that fairly quickly?
Yeah, sure. One of the best ways to do it is if you have an abductee who's an abductee of both the military aspect and the alien aspect, and oftentimes we'll have both on separate nights or even on the same night. Sometimes getting first abducted by the aliens and then by the military after that, or sometimes by the military, but there's aliens there too. So over time, you build up a really good data set of the nuances to differentiate the two, and they're similar, but they're also different. So they can abduct you remotely. Typically, the military stuff will use portals more so than that blue beam that's infamous in ufology that aliens use. So little things like that, essentially.
Chris, please pop in and join us. We're going to be having a space just with Tom. We're going to be redoing. We are not going for 10 hours, but we're going to redo a good Montauk space, and that we're going to be opening up for questions very early in that space. So anyone who has a question for Tom can jump in there. Again, I apologize for always running short on time, but I tried to get a lot of questions in today. Ganga, go ahead.
Just a quick question for Tom. Considering that what James said about mental manipulations and cognitive illusions that these creatures create in people, why is it so marginal, the realization among experiencers that these things are happening? I mean, people from the outside of the experience, they can see that pretty clearly, but the actual experiencers themselves don't seem to realize it, or at least that's my perception. Why do you think that they don't perceive that so easily? I mean, like he said, you're running your hands across a Nordic babe's arm, and then you run it the other way, and you suddenly start to realize you're not contacting what you think you're contacting with. Why don't people realize that immediately?
There's a number of reasons. One is that when you're under this manipulation, this illusory control, this is artificial hallucination, the entity is most likely also manipulating a different part of your mind that has to do with reality monitoring and discernment, and just checking the logic of it. And most of that is actually found in the prefrontal cortex, like the frontal part of your brain, which even in especially in dreams, when you're having a dream and you're going through some ridiculous situation and you just go along with it, you don't question how ridiculous it is, and you don't even realize that you're dreaming. Well, that reality switch can be psychically manipulated by the entity that's also inducing the artificial hallucination. So the person, even if they do sense that there's something incongruous about their experience, a lot of times they will not question it because they are under some sort of a telepathic or hypnotic control. And the reason why I mentioned hypnotic control is that even after the experience, even in the days or weeks afterwards, if they have some sort of flashback to the experience, then they may also not question it. Or if some sort of evidence pops out of their ear or their nose during a nosebleed, a lot of times they'll get rid of it right away and not question it, and they don't know why they do that. Well, it's because there is a post-hypnotic command installed in their subconscious that tells them, hey, if you find any evidence, get rid of it right away, don't think about it, it's nothing, it's nothing, it's nothing, right? So that's one of the reasons. And as far as like in general, why experiencers don't question a lot of these things, well, partially it's also because it's also an ego hook. Like, they're involved in it and they feel they have something special going on, and they're worried about ruining their relation with these entities. And I'm talking about the ones who believe they're having a more positive experience, so they don't want to upset them by questioning it too much, so they kind of go along with it. So there's so many different tricks and mental exploits that can be used to keep the lid on the truth.
Thank you so much, Tom. Tom, thank you for being here. Everyone look forward to Tom's space. I'll be putting it out in the next couple of days so we can be ready for it. And thank you to James, who's already left the space, and Tom. And I do want to say on James' behalf, too, a lot of what James is speaking from is from his own personal experience. It's a very vulnerable place to be. And so we always want to support that as well on James' behalf. And thank you all so much for being here.